Hakika Bwana atatuokoa, shetani anatuteka katika tundu lake la dhambi, lakini tukiomba kwa imani, hakika Bwana atatuokoa. Na sisi leo tukiomba kwa imani, Bwana atatuokoa, tusiingie majaribuni, hata shetani atuteke katika mitego ya dhambi. Bwana atatuokoa, hatutaangamia milele. Na sisi leo tukiomba kwa imani, Bwana atatuokoa, tusiingie majaribuni, hata shetani atuteke katika mitego ya dhambi. Bwana atatuokoa, hatutaangamia milele. Tukiomba kwa imani, Bwana atatuokoa, tusiingie majaribuni, hata shetani atuteke katika mitego ya dhambi. Bwana atatuokoa, hatutaangamia milele. Na sisi leo tukiomba kwa imani, Bwana atatuokoa, tusiingie majaribuni, hata shetani atuteke katika mitego ya dhambi. Bwana atatuokoa, hatutaangamia milele.
Races were won by newcomers. In District 1, Nadia Combs outsing the incumbent Steve Kona with 64% of the vote. North Hillsborough's District 3 electing substitute teacher Jessica Vaughn there with 61% of those votes. District 5 in Central Tampa went to Henry Shake Washington over the incumbent Tammy Schanberger. And Lynn Gray kept her seat in District 7, which is the countywide position. Carolina, take it from here.
And we just heard that Biden won New Hampshire. Just hearing that from my producer in my ear. We have a whole lot of coverage for you. We've been with you on social media as well as here on TV, and we will continue to bring you updates on all the races that we are keeping an eye on. Many races, of course, looking at the national map, looking at the road to 270.
Florida's close too.
Florida's close, and we, of course, are keeping a close eye on that. So far, clean election. So far, no real drama, right? Great to see.
There's a lot of
drama. No drama here in Florida. We've been there. But again, we are continuing to be with you here throughout the night here on TV. And Nightside is about to start in just a couple of minutes.
So we're going to come up at the top of the hour here. What you're going to expect to see is, one, I will take you to the map of Florida and show you how Donald Trump is able to gotten a bigger lead than we saw in 2016, and be on the cusp of winning Florida's 29 electoral college votes. I'll take you over the map in just a minute. Also, aside from that, we'll take a look at some of the important races. U.S. District House 13. We saw with Charlie Crist and Anna Paulina Luna there. That was a closer race than many expected.
And we saw the national attention on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Pinellas County, by the way, was pretty close too. All right, let's take you over to Nightside here on 10 Tampa Bay. Come join us as we go down all the races that impacted us here in Florida.
All right, let's get this started. Thank you so much for joining us on Nightside. I'm Carolina Lead. Ryan Bass right here with me, right next to me.
Yep.
Six amendments.
Been here all night.
Local congressional races, sheriff's races, a lot to decide on. Voters had to decide today. Ryan, we start with some big news today. Tonight, really, Florida still a close call.
99% of the precincts reporting right now We cannot tell you who has won yet. We're still waiting for some important precincts down in South Florida and in Osceola. A lot of enthusiasm, though. 29 electoral college votes here still up for grabs. I want to get you over to the electoral map, and I want to explain why Florida still has not yet called and why it has been such a close race in recent years, including this year. Florida has been decided by an average of 2.6 percentage points, the slimmest margin of any state in the country. I want to go grab the touch screen over here so I can give you an idea. You're looking at the electoral map of where it stands right now across the country. In the state of Florida, let's take a closer look at where things stand right now. Again, 99% of those precincts are reporting. Pinellas County. This was a county that Joe Biden had thought that he could potentially flip, and it looks like with 99% of those precincts reporting, he has. Again, we're having a little trouble here with this touch screen. If we can,
hold on.
Since we're having some trouble here on Nightside. Sumter County, another one. 66 was the median age. Biden flipped Duval, Seminole, and Pinellas. It seems at this point, the margins, though, in Trump country have been overwhelming. Again, some problems here with our tablets.
Yeah,
we try to get this electoral college map. I can pull it back up here for us, Carolina, as we take a look.
There we go.
All right, as we take a look here across Florida. All right, so let's see where we stand. Pinellas County, still pretty close here. Look at that. 1,000 votes. 1,000 votes in Pinellas County with 100% of the precincts reporting. What made the difference down here in Dade? Donald Trump eating into the margins. Look back to 2016. Hillary Clinton won 2-1 over Donald Trump back then. 83,000 votes. Trump making the difference. And then Sumter County, he won by 39 percentage points 4 years ago. Only lost basically a percentage point there. Carolina, Trump.
Jipe moyo ewe mwenzangu, safari ngumu, matatizo mengi njiani, lakini usife moyo. Tia meli yako mafuta, kwani sio mbali. Jipe moyo ewe mwenzangu, safari ngumu, matatizo mengi njiani, lakini usife moyo. Tia meli yako mafuta, kwani sio mbali. Meli yangu ina mafuta ya kutosha. Meli yangu ina mafuta ya kutosha. Meli yangu ina mafuta ya kutosha. Meli yangu ina mafuta ya kutosha.
Correspondent Jean Kang, who joins us from there. So, Jean, the state won by over 60% of the votes by Hillary Clinton last time around. Perhaps not surprisingly, that's set to be replicated again, isn't it?
Yes, as you see, it is evening here in Los Angeles, California. But as you mentioned, a lot of people also looking at the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton. Here in America, if you're not familiar with the system, even though the next presidential candidate could win the popular vote, it really comes down to the Electoral College. Here in California, we have the largest number of Electoral College votes at 55. But we have some new information. U.S. media is now calling it for Democrat Joe Biden, winning all of those 55 Electoral College votes. So once again, the largest in the nation. So that is new information coming out right now. We also know that Democrat Joe Biden is leading by a large margin in Arizona right now, and a Senate seat was won in Colorado by Democrats. So all of this information now coming in as a lot of the polling sites are starting to close here in America. But of course, there is a big time difference between the West Coast, where we are live in Los Angeles, California, and Washington, D.C. at the state capitol. Also, the big battleground states that we're talking about right now. Those are Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the key battleground states. And we are still waiting for Texas results to come through. As of right now, though, here in the state of California, the voter turnout has been very high at 10.5 million voters casting their ballots. And those numbers are just coming out very slowly as well. But we know because of the ongoing pandemic, a lot of mail-in ballots were sent to 22 million voters that were eligible here in the state of California. And it could be the largest national turnout of voters as well as mail-in ballots in the last century. That is how big this election is right now.
Gene, we were talking just before we came on air. You were telling me that social media has been such a big thing across the US in this election, but particularly perhaps there in California. The two rival camps trying to ensure that they're kind of really in control of it and obviously watching very carefully as well what the other side are putting out.
That is very true. When we're talking about social media, we know that in the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton and ongoing elections into this one, really there has been a problem with social media. That is because a lot of people, not just in America here in Southern California, but throughout the world have been depending, unfortunately, on misinformation that is put out, advertisements on Facebook, Twitter, as well as YouTube. So what those companies have now vowed to do is to make sure that if there is any false information, they're getting to that before it is put out to the public. And of course, as the election results will be coming in for the next few hours, they want to make sure that information is correct because they feel like if there is some type of cyber attack and social media is used, then that could influence the election and the popular thought of many of these voters.
And Gene, just finally, I mean, you were telling us in your first answer there about how well the Democrats are expected to do there. I mean, has there been tension? Because obviously we're starting to get some of those results starting to come in now and things, just very early indications that Donald Trump has perhaps done better than he might have done. I mean, were Democrats in California there feeling nervous about the results as they came in?
You know, largely since 1988, this has been a Democratic state here. So really, with pockets of Republicans throughout the state of California, of course, there was contention, there was controversy as they were battling the Republicans. However, we know that the governor here, Governor Gavin Newsom, has been very vocal and upfront, really battling President Donald Trump when it comes to those images of the massive, as they're called, super wildfires, also battles over climate change, the economy, and how the coronavirus was handled here and the pandemic itself. As we know in the nation, President Donald Trump has even had these massive rallies not wearing a mask, which has been criticized by Democrats. But when it comes to all of these 55 electoral college votes, they felt confidence that they would win this because that has just been the tradition of the state of California. However, even with all of those electoral college votes, we're going to have to wait and see who wins it all. That is going to be a massive question as the swing states, those are really the battleground states that we have to look out for right now.
Gene, thanks very much. Gene Kang joining us there from Los Angeles, keeping us up to date with the situation in California. Just going to bring you one result, which has just come in, perhaps not a surprising one, but Idaho going for Donald Trump. 55% of the vote there he got, so those 4 electoral college votes going to Donald Trump in Idaho. Let's talk to Ketavan Goldestani now, our correspondent who joins us from Washington. As I was saying there when I was talking to Gene, Ketavan, I mean, early indications, it is very early, are that Donald Trump perhaps has done better than the polls were predicting.
Well, it's still very hard to say because of where some of those states are reporting or the percentage of ballots that they're reporting. Some of these very close states, battleground states, are reporting just about 25 to 30% of their votes. So it's hard to see how much of that is simply that they're counting, for example, their election day votes before their mail-in ballots. That could lead to a sort of early red wave that's been dubbed the possibility of a red mirage, which would put Donald Trump ahead because of those election day votes that are typically going towards the Republicans before the early voting and mail-in ballots are counted and added to that tally, which could see Joe Biden come back. So it is a mixed bag for the Democrats. There are certainly states where the signs are not good, but there are also states where, for example, in Ohio, even though Donald Trump is currently still ahead as the state is still counting, there are signs that Joe Biden is doing much better than planned in Ohio. So that could be an indication, too. It's just very hard to read into these results because of how much we don't know yet and how many of those ballots haven't come yet and how long it's going to take to count them.
And Ketavan, as you say, the indications are very early, but it doesn't look like there's going to be a whitewash, does it?
No, that is certainly one of the things that we can say, maybe almost with some certainty, is that there won't be a landslide for Joe Biden. There was a talk of a...
Keep watching Voice of Victory TV, leading souls to Christ.
Eduka ya chile ime ya bosongo anteberi abagusiba ito eko onya ebito ao tigoliranse mnabonde sukari ama very fresh ama siya mandazi omachero mokene noku ama gutama yake giba Unique supermarket. Unique supermarket. Unique supermarket. Eko onya ebito ao tigoliranse.
Eduka ya Unique All-in-One Superstores ime yomochoba songo nigo egukoraliria ebintu ao aserigoli lya muguko enyolere chindagira ao buna emechere chisukari amabuta yogo karanga amasie obokima nalia ya mandasi amabere ni chindagira chinde chinyinge aserigoli ligi ya mono. Eduka ya Unique Superstores boigonkoni abale ebintu bya nyumba buna chibesini amarangeti chineti chikapeti cha nyumba ebirogo byebirole nebinde ebinge byokogokya okonene minyoka bwango toti wa maiga mbabwate chisabuni au chili misuligi ya Eduka ya Unique Superstore ni gobale abasani asokolenda enda babwate chindagira chirosirie ao ichichire chinyansumono otaru sumonwaroro abana bakembarati wa maega chindagira chabo nigo chire chinyinge chibirengo bigoro inyura edukeye nigo ere nebirengo byobochenu bweigoro mono totalire ime yomochobo songo anyene kigambero ekenene gya kisi barabare negetasini gya chigali gya keroka asamange kenyole asisi 0777220320 Unique All-in-One Superstores Limited omusanio aserigoli lya muguko.
Without carrying the state of Ohio. As those states remain too close to call, or they're not called, the Democrats in their headquarters are sitting there, and they have all of their mathematicians sitting down, doing the calculus, looking at county by county. What do we have to do in Pennsylvania? What do we have to do in Michigan? What do we have to do in Wisconsin? What do we have to do in Arizona? Because it literally comes down to a handful of those states. Their options narrow to get to that 270.
You say, what do we have to do? Of course, the voting's all over now. There's not much they can do other than sit and wait for the results. I mean, that must be, if you're crucially involved in one of these campaigns, you've spent the months, maybe even years, building up to this moment. I mean, the tension is palpable, isn't it?
The tension's palpable. Here's where the real tension is. If you are a campaign wonk, as they call it, that is, you're the guy, the woman who is hired by that campaign to look at all of the dozens of counties on the granular level in each of these states and figure out who's been mobilized, which votes have come in, how many early votes have been counted there, because early votes tend to lean, not exclusively, but tend to lean Democratic. In-person election day votes tend to skew Republican. They're trying to do a lot of very complicated maths right there, Stuart. You're absolutely right. But the pattern we see, and all these states are very different demographically, by their makeup, by the size of their populations, their cities. One thing we're seeing in common across these states, they all resemble Swiss cheese to a certain extent. Whether you're looking at Ohio, whether you're looking at states that haven't been called yet, whether you're looking at...
Karibu Mara Machineries, a solution to all your machine problems.
We are located in Kisii town next to Old Gatembe Hospital along Kisii-Migori-Kisumu Road. We deal in machineries like maize sheller, chopper, posho mills, coffee paring machines, chaff cutter, gold crusher, backpack pumps, water pumps, car wash machines, generators, and many other machines. Why waste money when you can save with us? Mara Machineries gives you quality, durable, and affordable products. Our machineries are 100% proven to be working efficiently. For inquiry, contact us today on 0723 376323. Mara Machineries, solution to all your machine problems.
At least before the counting started, was billed as Pennsylvania, perhaps even more so listening to Doug there. Polls closed there over 3 hours ago, but our correspondent Flo Vilmanote joins us from there. Flo, furious ballot counting going on, I'm sure. I mean, when could we see a result? Because it's very complicated there, isn't it?
It certainly is, and that really is the million-dollar question. When are we going to get the result for Pennsylvania? It could take a while. It could take a couple of days, in fact. The governor, Tom Wolf, has called for patience, for calm, and for unity in this very uncommon election where there has been so much mail-in ballots, so many absentee ballots. Now, you might be able to see it behind me. We're in front of the Pennsylvania Convention Center where ballot processing is underway. Election officials are expecting a record turnout, so there's just a lot of ballots to count here, and officials are working around the clock to process both those mail-in and absentee ballots, but also the ballots that people voted today. And the reason it takes so much time here in Pennsylvania is for several reasons. First of all, in Pennsylvania, you can only start counting the ballots on Election Day. So at 7 a.m., they started counting the ballots. That's not the case, say, in Florida or in North Carolina, where you can actually already tally the absentee ballots, and that way you just push refresh, and on the Election Day, you get the result, if you will. So that's one reason why it takes so long here in Pennsylvania. But also just physically, it takes a lot of time because in Pennsylvania, when you vote, it's pretty complicated. Basically, you have a ballot, and you put that ballot in a secrecy envelope, and that envelope you put in what they call a declaration envelope. So there's several envelopes, and all these envelopes have to be opened by people, by election staff here, and those envelopes, then the ballot is verified, it's smoothed out, and it's fed into a very fancy machine. They have lots of fancy machines here at the Pennsylvania Convention Center, and when they're working at full capacity, these machines can process 10,000 ballots an hour, so it can go quite quickly, but there is a human factor in here. It takes quite a lot of time. People go on breaks. That process can be slowed down occasionally. There are 150 workers on what they're calling an assembly line. That's the words that election officials have called it, an assembly line and a laborious process. They're working in shifts of 8 hours around the clock. So that's what's happening behind me. Another thing you need to know about Pennsylvania is that there has been an extension in the deadline for counting these ballots. Essentially, if you mailed in your ballot and it's post-stamped November 3rd, so Election Day, well, officials here have until November 6th, so 3 extra days to actually count those ballots. That was challenged by Republicans here in Pennsylvania. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, which decided not to invalidate this extension of the deadline. There was somewhat of a deadlock on the Supreme Court because the new Justice Amy Coney Barrett decided not to weigh in on this decision. So in a way that the Supreme Court stayed out of this one. So it could be put into question. All those ballots that will come in after that, between the 3rd and the 6th of November, will be counted separately in case that is challenged and they're invalidated. And indeed, Donald Trump has already vowed to challenge this voter extension. He warned that there could be cheating here in Pennsylvania. What's certain is that every vote counts here. No one wants to get cheated on their vote, and so it's going to take a long time to just count them.
Flo, thanks very much. Flo Vilmano joining us there from Philadelphia, covering the very latest, of course, then in Pennsylvania. Just to update you, just had a quick check. 46% of the votes being counted there. At the moment, Donald Trump winning by 55%. Let's bring up the latest results. As you can see, that is the latest position right across the country. Joe Biden at the moment on 209, Donald Trump on 118. Let's get a lot more. Solange Moujan has the very latest.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, let's take a closer look at that map. Again, East Coast, quite blue, South, quite red, and here on the West Coast, we have just gotten these results. Washington, 12 electoral voters, Oregon, 7, California, a whopping 55. Well, all of those have, as expected, gone to Joe Biden. However, there's some good news for Donald Trump. Idaho, 4 electoral college votes. This was expected as well, has gone to Donald Trump. Wyoming as well, with its 3. Utah, 6 electoral college votes have all gone to Trump. Now, let's take a look at the electoral college map to see where the candidates are looking at right now. It'll come up in a moment. There we go. So right now, Joe Biden is leading by 209, Donald Trump 118. But again, we are still waiting for some key states, such as Florida, Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina. Georgia, for example, we may not be getting results for until tomorrow or even the coming days later in the week because of it's going to take a while to count those ballots, Stuart.
Solange, thanks very much. Solange, with our results for the next few hours, she'll keep us up to date. Well, amid the real division, of course, between the two candidates, it does appear that turnout is still set to be very high. How difficult, though, has it been to actually motivate people to vote? Well, joining us now is Claudia Pena. She's Executive Director for For Freedoms. That's an artist-led collective for civic engagement. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. As I say, very divisive this election. I mean, surely it hasn't really been that difficult to get people involved, has it?
I suppose you could say that because sometimes division can be the thing that stirs up participation, but we've been coming at it from a different perspective. We believe that joy has a large role to play in getting people to participate in civic engagement. So we've been all over the country promoting joy. We're part of this coalition called Joy to the Polls, where we've had all these like music activations, dance performances, theatrical performances all over the country today, just to make it a space where people can have fun while there's this other conversation and other narrative happening around division.
I mean, Claudia, you're largely targeting the artistic community. How engaged would you say they are with politics?
Oh, this election season, it's astronomically engaged. All you can see, every direction you look is some sort of artistic expression about civic engagement. It's been really exciting this election season to see how many artists are at the table, making sure their voices and their ideas are heard. I mean, everybody that I speak to says there is so much art to be had this election season. In every direction that you turn, you see that artists are participating.
And being San Francisco, I mean, imagine a large proportion of Joe Biden voters in your congregation, if that's the right word. We're seeing some of the results starting to come in. It could be tilting towards Donald Trump. How anxious are you at this point as I assume anyway, a Democrat voter?
In California, I think California will easily be a blue state this election season. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take California. As you know, California is Kamala Harris's home state. So that, I think, will play a big role. However, I will say that all the work that we're doing at our organization and through this network of artists is really just about getting everybody excited to vote, regardless of party.
And just very finally, quickly, you're also offering help to people after the election as well, aren't you?
Yes. So we believe that the work doesn't end just with Election Day, because this is our nation. These are our people. Everybody that makes up every resident in the United States are people that we care about. And so the work continues. We're going to be doing something called the Citizens Guide to Healing. And there's a lot of different aspects of that, including global meditation and continued activations around joy, so that people continue to be involved in civic engagement, that this election is not the end all be all, that it's not just the one thing that everybody turns out for, and then they sort of go back to the normal practice of not engaging in the midterm cycle elections and other local elections. elections. We want to make sure that people are very, very excited to continue to participate, and also that maybe we can play a role in closing the divide a bit, so that we don't move forward as a nation that is so polarized, and instead start to see that if we're working together, we can actually get something done.
Good to see your enthusiasm. Thanks for joining us from San Francisco. That's Claudia Pena from For Freedoms.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a record number of Americans voted early, of course, this year. More than 100 million, in fact, 65 million of them by mail. Many states only started counting mail-in ballots today. Mail-in ballots generally favour Democrats, as Doug was saying earlier, and President Trump has been warning for months about the dangers of widespread fraud. Well, I'm joined here on set now by Derek Thompson from the France 24's Observers programme. I mean, Derek, this has led to some fake news online, perhaps not surprisingly. I mean, what exactly has the president been saying, Derek?
Well, he's been talking about it for at least 9 months now. Back in April, he sent out a tweet saying mail-in ballots substantially increase the risk of crime and voter fraud, with an exclamation point, as always. That was just one of the early tweets. He sent out dozens of tweets after that, warning in general that mail-in ballots can lead to fraud, suggesting that there will be widespread fraud tonight. And he's warned that it would lead to what he called a rigged election. Now, there's no evidence for that. Historically and statistically, voter fraud is extremely rare in the United States. That's what all the experts say. That's what all the historical studies show. But it seems that his rhetoric has caused some people to be sharing some fake news online. And we can take a look at a couple of instances of that.
Shocking. More than 1,000 mail-in ballots found in a dumpster in California. Boy, oh boy, they're finding thrown away Trump ballots everywhere now. California, Texas, and Pennsylvania.
Tweets claiming to show discarded mail-in ballots in the US weeks before the presidential election. They're among the messages going around on social networks warning of the possibility of widespread vote fraud on Election Day. Both of these tweets are false. Authorities in Sonoma County, California immediately pointed out that the first photo was of old empty envelopes from the November 2018 election that were disposed of as allowed by law. And the boxes discarded by the roadside, they were abandoned by a mailman in New Jersey also in 2018. Nothing to do with the 2020 election or any other. Now, Twitter took down both of these tweets, but it was too late. They had already been retweeted thousands of times, and the photos were still online weeks later. With record numbers of Americans expected to vote by mail this year, this kind of message has been fueling warnings of widespread ballot fraud. President Trump himself referred to thousands of ballots dumped in dumpsters at one of his town hall meetings. Now, there have been cases of mail-in ballots being dumped this election. 9 of them were found in a trash can in Pennsylvania in September, and 112 in a dumpster in Kentucky in October. Both of those cases are being investigated. So, do these two photos show evidence of election fraud? No, they don't. They were taken back in 2018. While there have been isolated incidents of ballots going missing this year, experts say there's no evidence of preparations underway for widespread ballot fraud.
Derek Thompson there, and Derek's still with us in the studio. Do you think this kind of fake news then, Derek, has actually had an effect?
I think it has. We haven't seen many instances of outright fake news like that, of photos being taken completely out of context. But experts we spoke to said that the constant barrage of criticism of mail-in ballots that comes from the White House and from President Trump supporters could erode Americans' trust in the process. Just last week, Trump was still sending out tweets. Big problems and discrepancies with mail-in ballots all over the USA. We must have a final total on November 3rd. So that's something that he will be pushing for. Now, that is because mail-in ballots, as he knows, as we know, they tend to favor Democrats. Many more Democrats have been voting by mail this year than more than Republicans. And the other thing about mail-in ballots is that it takes a long time to count them. As Flo Villamenot was telling us in Pennsylvania, it has to be either by machine or by untrained people. They have to match signatures, and that should be a very time-consuming process because it takes experts hours to match 2 signatures. Now it's being done by machines, or it's being done by people with little training. So it's going to take them a long time to process those votes. And then the key thing is that they will be able to be challenged afterwards. Lawyers on both sides have lawyers standing by, hundreds, if not thousands of them, who are going to be challenging votes in every jurisdiction in the swing states. So it could take a very, very long time.
Derek, thank you very much. Derek Thompson of our Observers programme, crucial programme here on France 24, really trying to point out those fake news elements, of course, which are all over the place nowadays, aren't they? Thank you very much, Derek Thompson from our Observers programme. If you're just tuning in, good to have you with us. You are watching France 24. This is our live coverage of the US elections from here in Paris. It's just coming up to 5:30 in Paris, 11:30 at night on the east coast of the USA. Glad you could be with us for the programme. In this half hour, I'm going to be talking to our correspondent Clovis Casale in Miami, and also the latest from Florida there, and our correspondent in Phoenix with the latest from Arizona. Also, Doug Herbert will be joining me back here on set. Let's have a quick look then at the latest map, showing you all those seats, exactly where they are and which ones are going for which candidate. I just had a very quick check at those 4 crucial seats, the early crucial seats that we've been watching: Florida, Georgia, North Carolina and Ohio. All of them at the moment still leaning towards Donald Trump, but the counting's still going on. So it's still very early days. We're still waiting for a lot more detail that we can bring you. But we'll continue, of course, to follow that and bring you up to date with all the results as they come through. So a short while ago then, we talked to Flo Vilmano in the key state of Pennsylvania. Perhaps the other key top state is Florida, where polls closed between 3 and 4 hours ago now, depending which part of Florida voters are in. We're going to talk across to Miami, talk to our correspondent Clovis Casale, who joins us from there. Clovis, it is incredibly tense Florida, isn't it? How are things leaning? What's the latest from that?
Absolutely. Out of all the battleground states, the swing states, we all knew that Florida was going to deliver results before the others because of the rules here. More than 60% of registered voters voted beforehand in the early voting process. So it was easier to count all the ballots today. And now it does seem that Donald Trump is going to clinch Florida. He is going to retain the Sunshine State. 4 years ago, he won against Hillary Clinton, and it does appear that he has won Florida, but we need to remain extremely cautious because the official results haven't come in yet. But it didn't prevent, a few hours ago actually, the Republican leaders here in Florida to claim victory for their man, for Donald Trump, the incumbent president. You had Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, who said on Twitter, big capital letters, big win for Donald Trump. The people of Florida had spoken, according to him, and Florida was going red. And it has to be stressed that he did so way before the official results were announced. So that's interesting to point out, of course. It has to be said also that we don't see scenes of celebration here in South Beach, Miami, even though we're on a major intersection with a lot of cars going by. All day we saw cars, trucks with Trump flags or Biden flags playing music out loud. So presumably in this part, at least, of Miami and South Beach, well, no one's celebrating. It has to be said also that it's more of a Democratic-leaning area. And we have seen pictures in other parts of Miami of Republican supporters celebrating. If it is confirmed that Donald Trump wins Florida, it's a reassuring victory because he knew he needed Florida in his bid for re-election. It's not over yet, of course, in the United States because we're still waiting for results in a lot of states, notably in those crucial swing states such as Pennsylvania and others. But it does come as good news, of course, for Donald Trump if it is confirmed that he has won Florida, and we should know the definite results in the coming hours. It should come in rather shortly, really.
Clovis, how do you think people were feeling before this election? I mean, obviously, Democrats were really hoping they might be able to take Florida. Perhaps the Republicans feeling very nervous about those Democrats, clipping at their heels, if you like.
Indeed, Republicans possibly nervous, but certainly behind closed doors, because we met a lot of Republican voters who are convinced that Donald Trump will win Florida. We attended a mass rally, thousands on Sunday night, late at night actually. It started around 11:30 at night, meaning that all of those supporters were defying the curfew, violating the curfew here in Miami, designed, of course, to curb the COVID-19 pandemic. But we all know what Donald Trump thinks of COVID-19, of masks, and you saw that at that large-scale rally with no social distancing. Maybe a third of the people weren't wearing masks at all, so that was quite surprising for us. Also coming from Europe, where in Paris, for instance, you know, that Stuart, everyone practically is wearing masks, respecting social distancing as much as possible. So the Republicans hopeful to win Florida. We also met, of course, Democrats, Democratic supporters who really hoped that, who hope still, because there are no definite results, of course, no official results, who hope that they can win Florida. It has to be said also, Joe Biden doesn't need Florida necessarily to win the White House, but it would have been an interesting signal, possibly on his road to the White House, if he is to clinch the White House. A lot of interrogations, questions still, and it remains to be seen in the rest of the country what the Democrats will do. But if it is confirmed that they've lost, that they haven't won Florida, well, it will be disappointing, of course, for all the supporters of Joe Biden.
Clovis, thanks very much for now. Clovis Casale joining us there from Miami. Now on to our third key state of the hour. We're going to Arizona now. Our correspondent Elisa Caverly joins us from Phoenix. Polls are closing 2.5 hours ago. Elisa, how's it looking at the moment there?
That's right. About 70% of the vote has been counted, actually just over 70%. And every indication is that Arizona is going to turn blue and Biden is going to take this state. Obviously, we can't officially announce that yet, but he is winning about 53% to Trump's 44% here in Arizona. And it's the first time that Arizona is going to turn blue since 1996, when they voted for Bill Clinton. And before that, it was 1952 that was the last time Arizona voted for a Democratic candidate. So this is a big flip here if this is the case. It's one of the only surprise flips in this election. Most of the states are going to the party that was assumed, but Arizona was a toss-up, and it seems as though Biden is going to flip the state of Arizona. Now, a lot of that is to do with the Latino vote. They are the highest registered vote since 2016, and about 30% of the people in Arizona are Latino, and they are Mexican Latinos who are more prone to support Joe Biden. Unlike, let's say, Florida, Miami-Dade is having, the Democrats are having a lower number there in Florida because Cuban Latinos are not as supportive of Biden as they are Trump, and that is not the case, though, here in Arizona, where a lot of the Mexican Latinos are very supportive of Joe Biden.
Elisa, thanks very much. Elisa Caverly joining us there from Phoenix in Arizona. Well, Doug Herbert is still with us, our international affairs commentator. As Elisa was saying there, maybe Arizona could be the one, the first one, if there is, well, maybe it'll be the only one, but, you know, the first big shock,
of the swing states. What's interesting here is, and her point was very well taken, you know, you talk about the Latino vote, the Hispanic vote. It is a very different equation if you're looking at Florida, where it's been an extremely fiercely contested battle there, not called yet, but perhaps Joe Biden underperforming, you know, in Florida, in Miami-Dade County, which is traditionally, you know, one of the most densely populated real vote getter for Democrats. Hillary Clinton outperformed, at least as of where we are right now at the count at this hour, outperformed quite considerably Joe Biden in that area of Florida. And you mentioned the Cuban Americans, because, okay, so the Cuban Americans, what you group them under the general rubric Latino vote. However, they tend to skew very hard Republican, and it is a giant community. Miami, 2/3 of the population is native Spanish speaking, many of them Cuban Americans. Arizona is one of these states, when you talk about the fast changing demographics of America, and more specifically in the American West and Southwest, even looking at Texas as well, where those demographic battlegrounds, they're concentrated around the cities and the suburbs. And this is why it's possible to even flip those states. This is why we even talk about the remote possibility that Texas could turn blue. Texas hasn't voted Democratic since 1976. It could flip blue again for precisely the same demographic reasons, only on a much larger scale as Arizona there. The changing America. They say that soon whites will be in a minority in the next 10 to 15 years. Whites will be in a minority in America. These states, the Texas, the Arizonas, are really, Nevada to a certain extent as well, are really at the vanguard, if you will, of this very fast-changing demographic in the U.S. So regardless of the outcome of the election this year, it'll be interesting to see how that demographic played into the Democratic vote, because that is, once again, the story of the election. Donald Trump trying to get all of the surrounding areas with the white voters, mostly working-class white voters, but not getting that more minority demographic, although he's been getting more Latinos and black votes.
Duncan, we're quite a long way now through our coverage. I have to say, no shocks.
That's just the beginning, Stuart. What do you...
Who knows? Who knows? But
We're just getting started here.
We haven't had any shocks, have we? No shocks so far. Does that surprise you?
No, I'm not surprised. No, actually, it's perhaps surprising that there is no surprise in a sense. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of pre-election day hype, if you will, a lot of talk about the possibility of one of those states perhaps going hard and early, one of those states being Florida or North Carolina or Georgia. Once again, none of them have been called yet. But the fact that we are at this relatively, advanced hour into the night, and it's getting late on the eastern seaboard of the United States as well, the fact that we're still staring at the map at those states, and it is so fiercely contested, and they are so close to call, that's a little surprising, given perhaps the high hopes that a lot of Democrats had placed on perhaps a hard flip of those states, which would make a powerful statement early in the night going in, lend a lot of momentum and wind in the sails, and more than just momentum, would give the Democrats many more options. So that's the crucial thing here, the paths to victory. There's a famous polling site in the U.S., 538, you've probably heard about it. I think we've talked about it before. Yeah. Going into Election Day, 538 gave the chances of Joe Biden winning at 90%. Chances of Trump 10%. Now, obviously, an election takes place in real time. It's a snapshot of a particular moment. So polls have to be taken for what they are. But that 90% suggested, at least, that in some of these states, there might have been a more clear trend, at least according to the polling, if you were to believe the polling, towards one of these states breaking a little earlier and harder for the Democratic side. The fact that hasn't happened is that a harbinger of what is to come in the hours ahead. But it is close to call, which means right now we are likely also to see a lot more litigiousness coming up. Those lawyers who have been deployed in their hundreds, if not thousands, battalions of lawyers to courthouses across the country, strategically in every state, they're licking their chops at this hour because they are gearing up perhaps for quite a little bit of a Donnybrook there later on.
We shall see. Doug Herbert is staying with us over the next few hours here on France 24. It's just coming up to 5:45 in the morning here in Paris, 5:45 to midnight, East Coast US. Let's have a look at the very latest situation, bring up the latest map that we've been showing you, of course, just to update you on the number of Electoral College vote now. It's Joe Biden on 209, Donald Trump on 118. So let's have a lot more detail then. Solange Mougin is keeping across the results for us here.
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, indeed. If we take a closer look at this map, again, as we were saying earlier, very few surprises so far, but major important ones, we're still waiting for them. East Coast, for the most part, generally blue. South is still going quite red, and along the West Coast as well, it is going blue for Biden. Now, again, if we take a look at the Electoral College results, we'll see that Joe Biden is ahead, but by a quite small margin. We're still waiting for major key states and major swing states whose results may not come in for a few days. But let's take a look as well at the Senate, because the Senate will be key for whichever whichever candidate wins. It'll be key for Joe Biden if he wins, because it will allow him to, getting the majority of the Senate seats will allow him to push through legislation, and vice versa. If Donald Trump wins, a Democratic Senate could seriously impede his ability to pass through legislation. Right now, we are at 42 Democrats, 44 Republicans, 2 independents, and again, not all races have come in. We have had a few significant ones. Alabama has gone to the Republican Tommy Tuberville. Lindsey Graham won in South Carolina. Now, this was expected, but it at the end became a very tight, not necessarily a tight race, but a contested race for what is generally a safe seat for Lindsey Graham. It did go to him in the end. For the Democrats, there was a positive step for John Hickenlooper. He won the Senate seat in Colorado.
Solange, thank you very much. Solange Moujan continuing to look after those results for us. An awful lot more coverage to come from live here in the studio. But let's just remind you, as we've mentioned in the last hour already, of course, throughout this campaign, that social media, just as much as when it really came into the fore 4 years ago, has been vital still. We're going to take a very short break and remind ourselves of its importance. Here's Inside the Americas with Jeannie Godula.
Hello, everyone. You're watching Inside the Americas. Social media is everywhere these days. In today's show, our in-depth look at just what kind of effect the growing online influence could have on voters in the U.S. presidential election. I'm Jeannie Godula. Barack Obama was the very first presidential candidate to ride social media platforms to victory, building his grassroots campaign of 2008 on Facebook and YouTube. 8 years later, Donald Trump took it to a whole different level, saying himself, "Without Twitter, I probably wouldn't even be president." Since then, campaigns have been run almost more online than in person. And just like in the last presidential race, social media is once again swirling. So what have the candidates, intelligence agencies, and troll farms learned since 2016? And what's changed this time around? Our Peter O'Brien found out.
It was called the first true social media election. The 2016 presidential campaign saw candidates rise and fall in the online arena, a massive Facebook data leak, and an unprecedented flood of misinformation. How are things different or the same this time around?
Yes, they broke the law, but...
This video with an anti-immigration message was pivotal to Donald Trump's campaign last election. Political analysts say it marked the transformation of Instagram from a photo-sharing app into a political tool. Meanwhile, Trump harnessed the free publicity offered by Twitter. His prolific populist posts continue to dominate political discussion today. The true depth at which people were being influenced over social media only became clear after the election, when it was revealed that millions of Facebook users' personal data had been taken without consent by Cambridge Analytica, then used for political advertising by the Ted Cruz and Donald Trump campaigns. Facebook's CEO testified to Congress.
And that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake. And I'm sorry.
Tighter restrictions on the use of personal data for political advertising were put in place ahead of this year's election. But for the FBI, another problem has proved harder to solve.
What concerns me the most is the steady drumbeat of misinformation. I worry that they will contribute over time to a lack of confidence of American voters and citizens.
In the last election, the Internet Research Agency, based here in St. Petersburg, deployed thousands of social media accounts, so-called sock puppets, posing as Americans, to sow discord and influence the results. Most of their posts would attack Hillary Clinton or promote Donald Trump, while others served to inflame debate from many different perspectives. Intelligence agencies know more about the threat now, but experts say troll farms have become better at disguising themselves, and they perhaps have an easier job this time.
Having more disinformation in the environment already that's available for the trolls to share without having to produce it themselves obviously does make the job easier. This is why it's sort of such a dangerous move by President Trump to be playing this card about undermining the sort of sanctity and undermining the integrity of the electoral process, because it plays into these narratives of foreign actors who also want to sort of claim that democracy itself is a flawed system of government.
Free speech protections make countering domestic misinformation difficult. Facebook and Twitter say they're clamping down and have been flagging misleading posts, even some of the president's own. For Trump supporters, though, that's just more proof that these companies are biased against conservatives.
To talk a bit more about the influence of social media on this year's election, let's bring in Caitlin Chin. She's a political analyst specializing in social media based in Washington, D.C. Caitlin, thanks so much for joining us. What for you is the biggest change in social media this time around?
Campaigns have shifted their strategy online this year due to COVID-19. People are spending more time on their screens, on their devices, at home because of social distancing protocols. Politicians are now realizing that it's important to reach out to younger voters, more diverse voters, women, all groups that use social media. And then people are also getting their news from social media now more than they had a few years ago. As a result, social media has become incredibly powerful. It's given presidential candidates a new way to reach out to voters, and vice versa. It also allows these politicians to target their message to voters. But it also introduces unique challenges of disinformation, content moderation, political polarization, user privacy. These are all issues that social media companies will need to address this year.
Are social media platforms doing enough to make sure misinformation is not being spread? For example, Facebook just banned QAnon across its platforms, including Instagram. Just to remind people, QAnon is this conspiracy theory movement that says Donald Trump's waging a war against Satan-worshipping pedophiles. Now, that ban's a big step up from Facebook's earlier decision on QAnon. Are moves like that too little too late?
Right. Banning QAnon now is a good start, but content removal it's a huge problem that goes beyond any one organization. When Facebook removes one platform, unfortunately, there are still other platforms where organizations or individuals who can spread disinformation. And unfortunately, some of them can be very convincing or come from public figures. Another very high profile example, unfortunately, is President Trump himself. President Trump is somebody who enjoys tweeting, and after the New York Times, for example, released his tax returns about a week ago, President Trump tweeted that the New York Times article was totally fake news, a claim that he has so far not substantiated. He has also tweeted that information regarding polling, mail-in voting, and COVID-19 is fake news. Currently, it is up to the social networks like Facebook or Twitter to decide how to address these claims and whether to fact check or even remove fake posts. So speaking of policy changes this year, in May, Twitter placed a fact-checking label on President Trump's tweet for the very first time. A couple months after that, Facebook began labeling some of Trump's posts. So going forward, this is a very pressing issue. This is something that social media platforms need to address, and potentially even something that Congress might take up with new legislation.
Caitlin, stay with me. One of the many new words that's entered the social media lexicon, of course, is influencer, those people who fill our feeds with the purpose of getting us to think and act just the way they do. And with COVID forcing more and more campaigners to stay home, social networks are overflowing with influencers, pushing both candidates and ideas. Catherine Cater-Clifford takes a look.
Post-COVID-19, campaigning has gone from door to door to screen, as influencers take up more and more space on the US political landscape.
I can name Kung Flu.
On the Republican side, Ben Shapiro is one of the more popular influencers. With the benefit of a background in communications, he counts over 7.5 million subscribers on his Facebook page. He writes numerous articles for the right-wing website The Daily Wire, which he co-founded, and hosts his own program, The Ben Shapiro Show.
New details emerge in the FBI investigation into Trump campaign members, and they are damning for the FBI.
Donald Trump can also count on media outlets like Breitbart, a right-wing site which used to be led by his former advisor Steve Bannon. Meanwhile, there are less conventional recruits on the job. Sisters Lynette Hardaway and Rochelle Richardson are known as Diamond and Silk. Former Democrats who crossed to the Republican side, the controversy-prone sisters are now airing pro-Trump shows online.
You had Jim Crow Joe. Yes. Tell a lie.
On the Democrat side too, influencers are gaining ground. Among them, Jon Favreau, a former speechwriter for Barack Obama, who counts over 1 million followers on Twitter. Along with fellow hosts from political communication backgrounds, he launched the Pod Save America podcast, making no secret of his aversion to Donald Trump.
As Trump spent more than 90 minutes shouting down Wallace, interrupting Biden, and spewing all kinds of lies, insults, conspiracies, and complaints.
Joe Biden can also count on artists such as rapper Cardi B,
Hi, Betty. How are you?
who has 73 million followers on Instagram. A former Bernie Sanders supporter, she joined Biden's camp in a bid to block Trump.
Crazy stuff that have to happen so they could open their eyes for the past 4 years.
Well, it doesn't have to happen. The vote matters. That's why you keep talking to people about the need to vote.
One of the most unusual lines of support, a brand of cosmetics named Biden Beauty, which sells Democrat blue-colored products. The profits are donated to Joe Biden's campaign, but those behind the mysterious venture remain anonymous.
I'm going to bring back in my guest, Caitlin Chin. Caitlin, how much do candidates like Trump and Biden count on influencers like the ones we just saw there? Is there any evidence that more likes mean more votes?
So social media is transformative in politics. It does allow users like influencers to foster strong social movements and attract a lot of likes, votes, retweets. However, I will say that it has its limitations. More engagement online, more shares and retweets don't necessarily translate into higher voter participation. And this is because there is a smaller percentage of highly involved activists, like influencers and their followers, that do account for a larger percentage of social media engagement related to politics. It's a little bit more difficult to engage with people who either do not use social media or who do not use social media for political purposes. And this is evidenced by the fact that voter participation has not significantly increased over the past 3 presidential election cycles since social media came into play.
Caitlin, we've talked a lot about the negative side of social media. Do you still believe social media and politics can be a force for good, particularly in the states at the moment where things are more divided than ever before?
I think that one huge issue at the moment is that there are so many unknowns. To some level, most people agree on the basic principles that we want to encourage security and fairness and voter participation while discouraging things like disinformation and bias. But when we take social media, we believe that there is so much potential for increasing voter engagement, but we also don't know. We don't know what their overall effects will be on consumer privacy and competition and cybersecurity and disinformation, whether the platforms really do have the benefits that they're describing, or if they actually result in more harm than good. But we can discuss these issues, and that's something that's really important for Americans to do as a democracy of informed voters, and especially in the 2020 presidential election.
Certainly is. Caitlin, thanks so much for that. Caitlin Chin is speaking to us there from Washington, D.C. Thanks to her. Thanks to you for watching. Stay with us here on France 24.
I'm Gene Kang. I'll be live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Melissa Kimberly with live coverage from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Clovis Casali, and I'll be reporting from Miami, Florida.
I'm Florence Vilmino, and I'll be live from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
And I'm Jessica Mazurier reporting from New York City.
I'm Ketevan Gorgeous-Dani in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
On election night, watch all the news unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
With the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the Appalachian Mountains to the west, vast plains make up the rest of North Carolina. A former slave-owning state, North Carolina has a population of just over 10 million. The state has a high number of evangelical Christians. It's part of the Bible Belt. Traditionally, the state's economy has been built on agriculture, tobacco in particular. Today, North Carolina is also known for its tech sector, centered around the Research Triangle in the capital, Raleigh. Politically, the state has tended to vote Democrat. But since the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, it's leaned more Republican. North Carolina has 15 electoral college votes. Its student-packed cities are more moderate, while the countryside tends to be conservative. In 2020, it's the African-American vote that could be decisive. Making up 22% of the state's population, it was high turnout among African Americans, which helped Barack Obama take the state, and their abstention, which brought victory to Donald Trump.
Special event.
It's an unprecedented election in the U.S., and we're ready to bring you unprecedented coverage here on France 24.
With our teams both here in Paris and across the United States, we'll have all of the results minute by minute and analysis from our team of experts.
Join us for an election night that could change the course of history, not only for the United States, but for the entire world.
Watch events unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
So they've crisscrossed the US in months of intense campaigning. Millions has been spent trying to ensure the vote goes either for Donald Trump or for Joe Biden. And now, we hope anyway, at the end of it all, we're finding out who is set to come out on top, as voters have been persuaded or perhaps dissuaded as to how they should vote. Good to have you with us. This is France 24's live coverage of all the results from the US election. I'm Stuart Norval. In this half hour of the programme, we're going to be continuing to cross to some of the key states. Our correspondent Florence Vilmino is in Pennsylvania. We'll be with her in a moment. And our correspondent Clovis Casali is in Florida. And our correspondent Keteran Gordestani as well is in Washington. We'll talk to all of them in just a moment. And we'll talk as well to Doug Herbert, who's with me here on set, our international affairs commentator. Let's have a look at the very, very latest picture that we can bring up for you. Just had a quick check of all the key states that we've been following. I'm thinking of Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio at the moment, those key early states that were considered to be the main battlegrounds. At the moment, Donald Trump still seems to be ahead in all of them, but we'll continue, of course, to bring you all those details. It's still very, very early on in the campaign. As I said, we're taking you around some of those key states, talking to our correspondents. We're going to go straight to Philadelphia now, which before this election anyway was billed as perhaps the key state, and our correspondent Florence Vilmino is joining us from there. Florence, why then, just tell us, is it such a key state? Why does it matter so much?
Well, you know, Stuart, they say that Pennsylvania, which is the keystone state, could be a keystone in this election. It's kind of a pun that we've been saying all night. But it really is true because there are 20 electoral college votes here in Pennsylvania, and races tend to be tight here. Now, Pennsylvania was once upon a time part of the blue wall that Donald Trump managed to crash down in 2016. So this was a traditional working class state, and he managed to win over a lot of these working class voters with promises of boosting the economy, with promises of resurrecting the coal industry, because Pennsylvania is located at the heart of the Rust Belt. So a big message based on the economy. And we actually attended a Trump rally. This was on Saturday night, where that really was his message. He said, look, you know, with me, you'll get 4 more years of a great economy. And that was the main concern of the voters there that we spoke to. Trump fans who say that, you know, they're all in for his economic plan. They're all in for the fact that he's big on fracking, which, you know, the livelihoods of about 500,000 people in Pennsylvania depend on fracking, so it's a big deal for them. So that's the situation in the rural areas of Pennsylvania. It's really a different story, though, when you see the big cities like Philadelphia, where we are, like Pittsburgh. These are big Democratic cities, big blue cities, and the vote is very different. We've been traveling around here in Philadelphia for a few days now, and I must admit we have not met one single Trump supporter here. We spent quite a lot of time in West Philadelphia, which is a predominantly African-American neighborhood. Voters there, all of them told us they want to vote for Joe Biden. They want change. Their main concern is how the president has been dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and also divisions that they feel in the United States right now. Philadelphia was actually rocked by some unrest last week after police officers fatally shot a black man. A lot of the store windows in downtown Philadelphia were boarded up at that time and have remained boarded up in case there is unrest following this election, because it is such an important election for Pennsylvania, for the United States as well. These 20 electoral college votes, both candidates know it and have spent a lot of time campaigning in Pennsylvania until the very last moment. Just yesterday, Donald Trump, well, I'm kind of lost in which day it is. The day before the election, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden held rallies in Pennsylvania because every vote counts here. In fact, while we were reporting today, there was a little plane that was flying over Philadelphia, one of those advertisement planes, and on it, it said, "Vote as if your life depends on it." That's certainly the feeling that we have here in Pennsylvania.
Flo, I've just been checking the latest figures. 55% of the votes have been counted there now in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump at the moment standing on 56% compared to Joe Biden's 41%. Of course, it's very difficult to know whether the areas that have already been counted tend to be Trump areas anyway. But, I mean, it's a very, very complicated situation there, isn't it, with votes being counted not just over the next few hours.
Absolutely, and keep in mind that, this is a little bit of a cliche, but Republicans tend to vote on Election Day. Democrats tend to vote via absentee ballots or mail-in ballots. So that could really shift the result as it comes in. But it is a particularly uncertain situation here in Pennsylvania. In fact, we're in front of the Pennsylvania Convention Center where ballot processing is underway. And it takes a long time in Pennsylvania for several reasons. The first reason is that in Pennsylvania, votes can only be counted on Election Day. That's not the case in other battleground states like North Carolina or like in Florida, where you can actually kind of pre-tally mail-in ballots before Election Day and just hit refresh on Election Day and get the result. Here in Pennsylvania, counting started at 7 a.m., so they had a little bit of catch-up time to do there. Also, voting in Pennsylvania is a little complicated. You have to put your ballot in 2 envelopes, and opening those envelopes takes a long time. Then they're fed into these very sophisticated machines that count them. And when the machines are working at full capacity, they can count about 10,000 ballots an hour. So it can go quite quickly. But there is that human element of physically opening the envelopes, basically, and feeding those ballots into the machine. So that just takes a lot of time. Also in Pennsylvania, there has been an extension of the deadline to count these ballots, to count these mail-in ballots, because it's a very unusual election. Due to coronavirus, a lot of people have been voting by mail. In fact, 2.5 million mail-in ballots were sent out of 9 million voters in Pennsylvania. So it's going to take a long time to count those ballots. It could take a couple of days before we have the result here in Pennsylvania.
Flo, thanks very much. A lot more from Flo then over the next few hours. Got one more state that we can call for you. That's the state of Hawaii. 4 electoral college votes up for grabs there, going perhaps not surprisingly to Joe Biden. Let's get the overall view then from Washington. Our correspondent Ketavan Gorjestani joins us. Ketavan, I mentioned I just had a quick flick through those initial key states that we've been following and looking at: Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio. At the moment, it still seems that Donald Trump is ahead in all of them, doesn't it?
Yes, it's looking like that, but let's be very careful, because sometimes the map can be a little bit misleading as to the final result, which is not to say that Donald Trump cannot win those states. But if you look at how many, the percentage of ballots reported and counted, some of these places have very low counts in very key areas for Democrats. So, for example, you'll have only 20-25% reporting around the major cities in those states, and then a lot more reporting from the rural counties, and that obviously skews things towards Donald Trump. Another thing that could skew things towards the Republicans is the fact that some of those states count their Election Day ballots first, and will be counting some of those mail-in ballots, those early votes later on, which means that the Democrats who overwhelmingly chose to vote before Election Day could bring Joe Biden back up. So it's very hard to read more into it than a short lead for Donald Trump at this time, but things could still change. or they could not, or Donald Trump could extend his lead. It's still very early on for those key states, but we call them battleground for a reason. We knew that those were the states that we were going to be watching closely, and those were probably the states that we were going to find out results for the latest. So that at least is going according to plan.
Ketevan, how do you think Democrats and Republicans are going to be feeling at the moment? And obviously, the large numbers of people number crunching, as you and I have been doing as well, following this. But it matters obviously so much, doesn't it? If you've been involved in the campaign, if you're one of those people who's been out on the streets, knocking on doors, perhaps you're even a politician.
Exactly. It's not just those battleground states. You have the Senate races, you have the House races, you even have the state Senates, the state houses. So a lot of things are running on this election day, not just the presidency. And they're going to be looking at all those results and looking at the shifts also, because there is one thing, for example, let's say that Donald Trump wins Texas. It's been traditionally a Republican state. But if he wins it by a very narrow margin, that's not a good sign for Republicans going ahead. Now, on the other hand, if you see Donald Trump overperforming in places where we were expecting Joe Biden to do well, that's a good sign for the Republicans. So it's going to be looking at those numbers, analyzing those numbers. The interesting thing is going to be the demographic breakdown, seeing whether the turnout of minorities, especially African Americans, that was something that Joe Biden was pushing for. Will he have succeeded in bringing out those African American voters? Will Donald Trump have been able to hold on to those white, non-college educated voters who helped him win the presidency 4 years ago? All of those questions will come out and will have to be analyzed by the two campaigns.
Ketevan, thanks very much. Ketevan Gordestani following things for us there in Washington. Another key state is Florida, and Clovis Casale is in Miami. Florida at the moment, Clovis, just checking the latest figures, 99% counted there now, and it looks like it's going to fall for Donald Trump. He's on 51%, Joe Biden on 47.8%.
Absolutely no official results yet, but it does seem highly unlikely that Joe Biden will win Florida. On the other hand, Donald Trump, the incumbent president, with a margin, a comfortable margin, let's say, given the amount of ballots that have been counted. And if this is confirmed, it's exactly the outcome that the Republicans wanted. They wanted to start with Florida, winning Florida, in order to be this being a stepping stone, if you will, because it's a crucial battleground state, as you mentioned, a swing state, 29 electoral votes, crucial, of course, in Donald Trump's bid for re-election in order to reach that magic number of 270. Donald Trump won 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton, of course, here. But what's interesting is when you look at these preliminary results, Joe Biden is doing well in the big cities, in Tampa, in Orlando, in Jacksonville, in Miami. But compared to 4 years ago, he's not doing as well as Hillary Clinton, notably in Miami. And that's possibly that Donald Trump convinced the Latino voters and the Cuban Americans to back him en masse. And it's true that when we attended one of his last rallies, it was Sunday night here in Miami, Donald Trump really managed to mobilize his supporters, and we saw a lot of these Latino and American Cuban voters in the crowds, and they were also telling us that they agree with Donald Trump, that Joe Biden is too left-wing for them. Bear in mind that a lot of these voters dislike Fidel Castro in Cuba and all the left-wing regimes. So clearly that Donald Trump rhetoric resonated well with those voters, at least here in Miami.
Clovis, thanks very much. Clovis Casali joining us there from Miami with the very latest from Florida, giving us a bit of an insight to some of the issues, of course, that people have been really talking about in this election. Doug Herbert, international affairs commentator, is with us here on set. What do you think, Doug, are the big kind of topics that people are following? Coronavirus is what comes to my mind.
Yeah. Giant. I mean, look, coronavirus and the economy were the two biggest topics among voters. What is remarkable here, and, you know, we're so sort of laser focused right now on the granular data coming in, the results state by state. Take a step back and think of the issues that have been hammered away at, especially by Joe Biden in the past few days, and taking a dramatically opposite approach, Donald Trump, coronavirus. We have 230,000 plus Americans dead from this virus, over 9 million infected, by far the highest infection rates and death rates in the world right now. It was a message where Donald Trump, in the final week of his campaign, actually the final 2 weeks after emerging from the hospital after contracting COVID himself, continued the exact same behavior, packing rallies, often, yes, the people on stage behind him shown wearing masks, but his own supporters in the crowd, many of them maskless and packed together at big open rallies. A stark contrast with the message that Joe Biden had been driving home. He chose to have, and it was a strategic decision, very dense, sparse rallies where most people were gathered in their cars. Their reaction was by honking their horns in their cars. And he wanted to strike that contrast. Yes, there's Donald Trump's packed rally where he is a super spreader of coronavirus. This is the way I'm going to do it. Fine, I run the risk of Donald Trump, as was the case, saying, look how few people show up to Joe Biden's rallies. But that was, at the end of the day, what the message he wanted to send. So if you're looking from this election from the outside, or even from within, having followed the campaign in the final days, what is striking is that if COVID was the top issue on American voters' minds, clearly a very large number of voters right now, and it's a very tight race, believe that if Donald Trump didn't completely bungle it, that he actually may have handled it very well, that is not something that has deterred them from voting for Donald Trump. Does that mean that the message of Joe Biden has fallen on deaf ears? No, but it would suggest that among Donald Trump's voters, that message that Donald Trump is responsible for making this country a lot sicker and causing a lot more deaths than would have been the case under a different, more competent president, that message perhaps has not been heard as loudly as perhaps the Democrats had been hoping it would be heard. And the other big takeaway, I guess, right now is you're looking at a lot of these these battleground states. A lot of Democrats had gone into this night. The question people keep saying, are you having deja vu with 2016? Is this another case of 2016? No, 2016. People were just generally shocked. There was a sense of whiplash in 2016. What's different about this election is that people went in, everyone citing 2016. Everyone saying, a lot of people are very cognizant, this could be another 2016 scenario. A lot of people watching these results coming in are probably thinking, oh, 2016, it's smelling a lot like that all over again. Be very careful. It is early days yet. And when I say early days, I literally mean early days, because as we heard Flo reporting from Pennsylvania, Clovis, this counting is going to continue on for many more days. We have to, what's really important, beyond just the numbers right now of who's ahead and who's behind, how many early votes have been counted? How many in-person votes have been counted? We don't have that in every state's case. So we really don't know. It's not just who voted, it's where those ballots came from. It's going to be fascinating going forward to see the breakdown, but the counting is still very much going on. And even those states right now, which are leaning towards Donald Trump, they don't want to call, because all you need are a lot of votes to come in a Democratic-leaning bastion, and that could swing an entire vote.
Who knows? Doug, thank you very much. Stay with us. You can be back on air in just a few moments' time. Sounds like our special programme should go on for several days or maybe even weeks. Who knows? We're expecting Joe Biden potentially to speak, apparently, in 10 or 15 minutes' time. So as soon as he does, if he does, we'll bring that to you here on France 24. Let's just bring up that map once again that you were looking at while Doug was talking just a few seconds ago to show you the latest position, those different states that have already been called. As far as the Electoral College votes stand, we're on Joe Biden for 223, Donald Trump on 118. We've just had one extra state coming in. That's the state of Minnesota, which has been called for Joe Biden with just approaching 54% of the vote. We're going to have a lot more detail now on those results that have been coming into us, and Solange Mougin is following them all for us here on France.
Thanks, Stuart. Now let's take a look at the Electoral College breakdown right now. As you were saying, Biden 223 and Donald Trump 118. But again, those figures, that breakdown could and very will likely change. Perhaps for Trump, perhaps for Biden. We don't know yet. Major swing states are still in play. One of those states is Arizona. Now, Arizona has been going through a major demographic change. We don't have the results yet for Arizona, but in the state, the Hispanic vote could be very important for either side. The Republicans in the state are generally sort of moving towards the Democratic side. So the demographics there are changing, and that could favor, perhaps, it's not sure at all though, Joe Biden. Now, it used to be, it's important to say, a very strong Republican stronghold. Let's look at the entire map again. So far, no major huge surprises, which means that this is likely to be a tight race. We'll have to wait and see for the votes to come in. East Coast generally blue, South generally red, and again, the West Coast blue as is expected. We are waiting for key votes for absentee ballots to see where this all turns out.
Solange, thanks very much. Solange continuing to follow that for us here on France 24. And as the results continue to come in, let's get some reaction from Republicans we're going to talk to now. Joining us from Washington is partner at Firehouse Strategies. He's also a former chief of staff to the Florida Republican Marco Rubio for president campaign. He also acted as a consultant for the Republican Party, particularly 4 years ago during the last election. Matt Terrell, thanks very much for being with us on the programme. We're trying to be very, very cautious, but as things stand at the moment, I mean, it's not looking too bad for Donald Trump, is it?
That's right. Look, President Trump so far at this moment, and there are still many votes to be counted and a long ways to go yet, but right now is successfully executing the strategy that he needed to execute on, and that is working to maintain many of the states he won just 4 years ago, really come into this race with a tighter map to victory. And so far at this moment, he appears to be picking up key swing states or in the lead in key swing states that will be vital to get to him getting to that magic number of 270.
Does it surprise you at this stage? Because it's not necessarily the picture we were expecting, if you believe the pollsters anyway.
Sure. Well, look, I had the opportunity to spend some time in my home state of Wisconsin, and I live in Washington, D.C., but while I was spending time in Wisconsin for a couple of weeks over the summer, it was amazing to see the energy on the ground. There was a disconnect between what's taking place in Washington, D.C. Versus what's taking place in these key battleground states. So again, there's a long way to go tonight. Anything can still happen, but I think this is a reminder of what's really going on in states across the country and some of that disconnect that's taking place right now between Washington and the nation.
Interesting you say that, Matt Terrell. Stay with us. I'm going to bring in as well our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert, who's with us. Disconnect, Matt Terrell's talking about there. Perhaps not just the media, but the observers as well. Perhaps thinking the Democrats were going to do better here and perhaps not quite understanding American voters?
No. I think it's way premature for that type of talk right now. The polling has become much more sophisticated. And whether even Republicans and Democrats, even Republicans who, dismissed the polls 4 years ago, even they will acknowledge that the polls have become much more sophisticated. They become more conservative. And few polls were predicting outright landslides going into the day. They were predicting in certain states perhaps larger margins than we've seen so far tonight. There's some big outstanding questions which are not going to be clear tonight. They probably won't be clear for many days. But one of the criticisms leveled against Donald Trump and his strategy has been a failure to reach out beyond his base, reach out to a broader swathe of Americans, especially in what we were talking about earlier, the more diverse, the fast-changing demographics. Now, what will be interesting is to see his numbers did go up in some of the earlier polls among Latino voters. They're still not stunningly high, but higher, and among black voters as well. Be interesting to see in each demographic how much did that make a difference in states, perhaps, that he ends up winning, that maybe he wasn't expected to win, or that were sort of seen as on the fence going either way, where a demographic made the difference? That will be fascinating to see later on. To what extent will he have relied on and perhaps not just retaining, but even picking up support, because he was reaching out to white working class voters, tending to be white voters without a university degree. To what degree was he picking up votes? Because we know that there were people who didn't vote, perhaps, among that demographic. Back in 2016, Donald Trump was still helping to get more votes from that demographic. And finally, that suburban demographic. So much has been made, especially in the Democratic camp, about Joe Biden's strength in these suburbs, which is also a function of changing demographics in America. A lot of populations moving around big city centers, especially in Texas, cities like Dallas and Houston, and in Georgia, obviously the Atlanta suburbs. To what extent was Donald Trump's base there eroded, or, as the case may be, not eroded as much as some pollsters perhaps thought? Those will be the things that will be interesting on a granular data level to look at afterwards.
We're going to call a state for you, and it's a crucial one as well. This is Ohio. It has gone to Donald Trump. The latest figures I've got for you, 43.58 for Donald Trump and 45 for Joe Biden. And just as I was saying, we're also going to call, which one was it? For Iowa, did you say there? Montana, we can call. Let me just look that one up for you. Montana being going to Donald Trump, and Iowa as well going to Donald Trump. Let's ask Matt Terrell about that. Matt, not surprised, or is that how you were expecting it to pan out?
Well, look, these are key states that the president won 4 years ago and needed to win, frankly, in order to have a potential path to that magic number of 270 electoral votes. So again, for the president, this is exactly what he wants to be doing tonight, winning in these key states that he has to win in order to get to that number. In the end, and by the way, I agree that all this is very premature in terms of who's actually going to win this race. This race is likely going to go for a couple of days in terms of counting the final ballots. But to that point, likely this race will go into that quote unquote blue wall. States of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That's the next stage here. It's one thing for the president to hang on to a Florida, Ohio, Iowa, as these states get called. In the end, to get over to that magic number of 270 electoral votes, they'll likely go into a Pennsylvania, a Michigan, to get over the finish line to a victory.
I'd like to talk about the personality here. I mean, a lot of people saying that this election is all about the personality, perhaps even more so of Donald Trump than Joe Biden. I mean, obviously, for many people, Donald Trump is such a divisive figure, and yet here he is, apparently doing pretty well in this election.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yep, absolutely. No, look, he is at a stage right now where that was on the ballot. At the end of the day, the Democrats and Vice President Biden are really trying to make this race a referendum on President Trump, make it a referendum on President Trump's handling COVID-19. And look, as it stands right now, and anything can change, it appears the American people, in terms of these key battleground states, more of them were liking what they saw. And we saw the president in the final days of this race in particular, go beyond just talking about the virus and other issues and lean into many of his strengths. And that is talking about jobs, talking about the economy. And what we saw, and we should take much of this with a grain of salt, with the exit polling, wasn't just COVID-19 that was highly important to voters, as it should be, but also the economy and jobs. And the president does quite well typically on the issue of economy and jobs. And I suspect that's playing a leading role right now, that issue of the economy in terms of the president's strength so far that we're seeing in this race, but we still have a ways to go.
Doug, Matt Terrell there saying that people saw Donald Trump and they liked what they saw.
Well, this is always, but look, first of all, I hate to use the word, and I should probably slap myself, but polarization. These are two candidates where, you're either from Mars or Venus here. People have starkly differing views. This is not a case of two candidates running against each other where some people sort of like one and sort of like the other. It is extremely sharp, people's opinions of one or the other. You tend to absolutely, if you're a Biden supporter, you despise Donald Trump. You think he's a vile human being, not just a vile politician. And if you are a Trump supporter, you think Joe Biden is everything America does not need right now. You see him as a weak candidate, as Trump would quip, Sleepy Joe. You joke about some of those Twitter handles that Trump assigns. they work at his rallies. They rile up his crowd. They get and the images. Here I am talking about it right here, right? It sticks with you, regardless of whether or not it's factually correct. You start to think of one of the other candidates as adhering to the image that your rival paints of you. So yeah, among his base and perhaps even beyond just his diehard base, Trump definitely has a charisma that appeals to them. And just as much as Biden, to his own supporters, have absolutely zero understanding of how anyone could possibly vote for Donald Trump. And this gets back to the whole issue, because regardless of the outcome of this election, we are looking at America going forward where there's still no clear solution for dialogue, bridging people's differences and bringing them together, because there's still an inability for people on a real basic level to talk to each other. It reverberates from Washington right down to the heartlands of America, right down to the places that we've been speaking to our correspondents as they've been crisscrossing a lot of those, the Blue Belt states, the Blue Wall states, speaking to people. I did it 4 years ago, going across from Ohio to Pennsylvania. It is remarkable how you cross. It's like literally crossing a galactic divide. You cross one county border into another, you enter a big city, it's like a different country. And that is a problem going ahead.
Matt Terrell, then one last question for you. If Donald Trump does win this election, is he going to be able to reunite America?
Well, the next president needs to reunite America. That's going to be a big challenge. I agree that this country right now is polarized, and we're seeing that in this election. We've seen it in the polling. And the next president, if it is President Trump, will need to have the ability and move forward with uniting the country. So at this stage in the game, we need to let the process play itself out. We're not quite there yet in terms of the final outcome of the race, as we all know. But in the end, unity is on the ballot. And the American people, I believe, want to be united. And the next president, if it is President Trump, will need to work to bring this country together.
Matt Terrell, thanks very much for joining us there. That's Matt Terrell, who's joined us from Washington. He's a partner at Firehouse Strategies, former chief of staff to the Florida Republican, Marco Rubio. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme. Going to hear from a few voters now. We haven't heard from some for a little bit, have we? So let's hear from some voters to hear what they are saying. These voters from Florida and from North Carolina.
It's tighter than I would have liked. COVID has made this very, very, very hard on everybody.
Neither one of the candidates had any plans or interests for our people. I had people tell me, vote for the lesser two evils and to vote Democrat, but I'm not going to vote for the lesser two evils.
I think that voting is 1,000,000% a privilege, so I think it's very important, regardless of who you vote for, to wake up in the morning and go out there and exercise this privilege that we have.
We say black votes matter and black lives matter, but to be honest, every single vote counts. It doesn't matter your race, ethnicity, how old you are. I think it's just very important to vote because our life depends on it.
I hope after this, regardless of results, we can all just work together and, make things better. That's the main goal,
Voters there in Florida and North Carolina. If you're just tuning into us, it is 6:30 in the morning here in Paris. It's midnight on the east coast of the US. You're watching France 24's continuing election coverage of those results continue to come in, of course, from the US following the situation between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We are expecting at some point in the next half hour Joe Biden to speak. We'll bring that to you, of course, when we can here on France 24. Let's just have a quick look then at the map to see those states that have already been called. As it stands, we're on Joe Biden with 223 electoral college votes, Donald Trump on 145, but obviously that large swathe of red, as we're used to seeing there in the middle of the map, with just the blues down the east and the west coast largely. Let's cross to Washington, talk to our correspondent Ketavan Gorjestani now, who joins us from there. Ketavan, we're expecting then Joe Biden to speak very shortly. I mean, presumably he's not going to say that much at this stage. I mean, we're certainly not expecting him to concede or to claim victory, I would assume.
Well, it's actually surprising because we've been kind of going back and forth as to whether Joe Biden was going to actually address the nation tonight, because initially it was planned officially that Joe Biden would be speaking at some point in the evening, addressing the nation. And then he sort of hinted in one of his final stops before heading home to Delaware that if he had nothing to talk about, he would not be talking about it. And so people assume that maybe if the race was too close, he would not speak at all. Now it seems that this is back on track, that he will actually be addressing the nation. And the question is, what is he going to say? Will he call for calm and patience to wait for those very important results in key states like Pennsylvania, for example? As you said, it's very unlikely that he will be conceding, especially because the Democrats remember what it's like to concede before retracting in an election back in 2000 with Al Gore. So it's going to be very key to see what he touches up upon, what he speaks about, who he speaks to, but it will likely be something about waiting for all those ballots to come in and be counted.
And presumably we'll hear a lot more from him and from Donald Trump over the coming days as well, Ketavan. But Democrats and Republicans and indeed just ordinary voters right across the US watching these results very nervously as they continue to come in.
Yes, because neither side is really looking like they will have a wave, whether it's red or a blue. There had been talks of a landslide for Joe Biden. That certainly will not be happening, no matter what results come in. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he's winning the states that he is supposed to win so far. We just called Iowa and Ohio. Those were two states that were very important to him, especially Ohio. Every single Republican who went on to win the presidency won the state of Ohio. So that is a very symbolic, at least, indicator. But the Republicans are going to be looking at some states very nervously, because those states could really go either way. Of course, Florida, you see Donald Trump in the lead. It's looking good for him. But Florida has been traditionally a state that has given a little bit of stress to both sides of the aisle. So really, both campaigns could look at some things and think this is looking good for us, but other indicators not looking so good. So it's really a toss-up, both for the Democrats and the Republicans, even though Donald Trump is looking in the lead in some of those key states. We'll have to see what happens when those mail-in ballots especially come in those states and those big cities are counted, because that's also going to play a lot in or against the Democrats.
Ketavan, thanks very much. More from Ketavan through the rest of the programme on France 24. We're going to go to New York now. The polls there closed 3.5 hours ago. The state has been called for Joe Biden with 55%. Perhaps not that surprising. Jessica Lamajiri, our correspondent who joins us from there. I think of New York and I think of coronavirus. That perhaps has been the main story there in New York that's really dominated this campaign, would you say?
Yes, certainly. New Yorkers suffered really badly, certainly in the spring due to the coronavirus pandemic, and the majority of New Yorkers blame Donald Trump for mishandling the pandemic and for letting things get so bad. So I can say that the vast majority of New Yorkers, certainly of people in New York City, went out and cast their votes to get Trump out of the White House. And right now, all they can do is watch and wait, nervously biting their nails, waiting for the rest of the results to come in. And it seems that they might be waiting for quite some time. Many people here are still very much traumatized by what happened in 2016, and they fear a repeat of that. It seems that the high hopes for a blue landslide are not materializing, and so people are getting increasingly nervous.
And Jessica, I know you're following some of those other key states for us in the north and the east there in the US. I'm thinking of Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin as well.
Wisconsin in particular, because I travelled there recently. As you know, Wisconsin went by a slim margin to Trump in the last election, and it was the first time indeed that it had gone to a Republican in 36 years. So that really that was quite something. And it was very interesting to speak to farmers in Wisconsin who had voted in droves for Trump, and to hear that many of them are still supporting Trump despite the fact that they have suffered under his term in office, largely due to his trade war with China. Since that trade war, which led to milk prices in particular plummeting, Trump has then gone on to give them stimulus checks, and that has helped them quite a lot. And it seems that farmers on the whole are still backing Trump. So it's going to be very interesting to see the results coming out of Wisconsin, but I don't think we expect them to come out in full till about 5 a.m. local time.
Jessica, thanks very much. Jessica Majuri, our correspondent, joining us from New York there. Got a state to call for you. I have to say this is a crucial one. Going to call Florida. It has gone to Donald Trump. All 29 Electoral College votes then for Florida going to Donald Trump. You can see there the latest figures. 51.3% of the vote, Donald Trump there, against 47.8% for Joe Biden. Talking of Joe Biden, we're also hearing that his convoy has arrived at where he's due to speak in the next half hour, Wilmington in Delaware. We're going to bring you that speech as soon as he does speak, of course, here on France 24. Doug Herbert, our international affairs expert, is with us here on set. So Florida being called, yeah. Joe Biden about to speak.
I want to comment on the Florida thing. You know, Florida is the mother of all battlegrounds in the sense that it is 29 electoral votes, once again, under the Electoral College system. That is really all that counts at the end of the day. Winner takes all, except in 2 states in the country, so you get all of the electoral votes in that state, regardless of how small your margin of victory is. So in this case, taking Florida, what does that mean for Joe Biden? Florida's not make or break. It's a big get. And Donald Trump's camp right now, I'm sure that in their headquarters there, he's in the White House tonight, I think, they're all probably very happy and in a jubilant mood over Florida. However, we've been saying all along that there are many paths to victory for Joe Biden. The thing is, though, and we saw this in 2016 for different reasons, each of those big gets, which are sacrificed to the rival, each one that the Republicans pick up, if it's Florida, if it's North Carolina, which hasn't been called yet, if it's Georgia, which hasn't been called yet, if those go to the Republicans, does it mean Joe Biden doesn't have a path to victory in the 270 needed Electoral College votes? Not at all. It just means that that path becomes narrower and narrower. So what happens if you're a Democrat right now, strategizing where you need the votes now, where are you looking? Well, your head pivots from the East Coast and you go like that to the West, and you look at Arizona, which was called for Joe Biden. So that's something that gives him a little bit of a buffer zone, a little bit of a comfort, a cushion. And then they pivot up their heads again and they look up to the Rust Belt, to the so-called blue wall that Flo was talking eloquently about earlier. And that becomes more and more crucial because in a situation where the Democrats don't pick up any of those hoped-for states, whether to flip them, Georgia, North Carolina, or Florida on the East Coast, they need, depending on the outcome, with Ohio going for Trump, maybe Iowa going for Trump as well, they will need more and more to pick up that whole blue wall. You cannot afford to have a crack, so to speak, in that blue wall.
Doug, just to correct you on something very quickly, Arizona not called yet. So
Arizona's not called.
Still
okay.
waiting for that one to come in. But at the moment, just looking at the latest figures, Joe Biden's on 53%.
Arizona is it's been sort of a toss-up all night. Arizona is the big hoped-for get right now. Hasn't been called either way. But like I said, not getting those 3 states in the Southeast, you need the Arizona plus a combination, hopefully all 3 for the Democrats of that blue wall. 2, if they only get 2 of them, then they need another big get somewhere else in the grab bag, and those options are narrowing too. Still plenty of options for Joe Biden, still early days, still lots of votes to be counted, and not tonight, but in the days to come.
Let's go out of the box. Let's not talk about the presidential election for once. We're going to talk about the Senate elections, so in the House of Representatives, because this is pretty surprising, actually, because it looks like it's looking pretty tight in the House of Representatives, isn't it? Which obviously the Democrats have been controlling for so long.
Yeah, it is tight.
We're just going to cut to Joe Biden, actually. We're seeing him arriving. Let's listen to Joe Biden.
Patience is commendable. We knew this was going to go long. But who knew we're going to go into maybe tomorrow morning, maybe even longer. But look, we feel good about where we are. We really do. I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good. We're feeling good about where we are. We believe one of the nets has suggested we've already won Arizona, but we're confident about Arizona. That's a turnaround. We also just called it for Minnesota, and we're still in the game in Georgia, although that's not one we expected. And we're feeling real good about Wisconsin and Michigan. And by the way, it's going to take time to count the votes. We're going to win Pennsylvania. Yes. I've been talking to folks in Philly, Allegheny County, Scranton, and they're really encouraged by the turnout and what they see. Look, you know, we could know the results as early as tomorrow morning, but it may take a little longer. As I've said all along, it's not my place or Donald Trump's place to declare who's won this election. That's the decision of the American people. But I'm optimistic about this outcome. And I want to thank every one of you who came out and voted in this election. And by the way, Chris Coons and the Democrats, congratulations here in Delaware. Pardon? Hey, John, the Gov, yeah, the whole team, man. You've done a great job. I'm grateful to the poll workers, to our volunteers, our canvassers, everyone who participated in this democratic process. And I'm grateful to all of my supporters here in Delaware and all across the nation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And folks, you heard me say it before. Every time I walk out of my grandpa's house up in Scranton, he'd yell, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandma, when she was alive, yelled, "No, Joey, spread it." Keep the faith, guys. We're going to win this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Your patience is great. Let's walk over here.
Joe Biden sounding very optimistic there. We believe we're on track to win. Keep the faith. It ain't over until every ballot is counted, Doug.
Yeah, Joe Biden is basically sticking to... There's nothing actually shocking about what Joe Biden said. You know, people might listen to what he's saying and say, oh, he looks a little downcast and dejected. Actually, Joe Biden has been sort of warning about the need to make sure every ballot is counted and how absolutely aberrational in every way this election has been. It's not the typical election given the context of the COVID pandemic, given the massive amounts, over 100 million Americans casting early ballots meaning either you mail in ballots, absentee ballots by post, or you go early in days set up before actual election day. You go in person to polls and you drop your ballot in a ballot box. Between those two options, there was in some states, such as Texas, the number of voters in early voting surpassed the entire turnout for 2016. So the equation, the calculus of this election and the counting of ballots was always going to be radically different, very different than what we've seen in past elections, where, like we said, you were used to just, it's over, the polls close, it goes up on the screen as a projection, and there it is in the bag. We're right now going through, and he's basically setting people up for that medium to long haul right now. That speech was essentially, everyone settle down. This is essentially what we saw, what we foresaw. There's nothing shocking here. No reason for anyone to panic. I'm still confident. I think he's in earnest there. I don't think he's just trying to talk that he doesn't believe. I think he honestly believes right now that this is going to be the election that a lot of people foresaw, not everyone, but a lot of people foresaw, that is going to go down to those mail-in ballots, the counting of the ballots, exactly the type of election that Donald Trump wanted to stop the vote counting for.
You don't think there's a disconnect then, Doug? Because as you're saying, he did look a little bit dejected, perhaps. I mean, he mentioned Georgia, for example, saying he felt optimistic about it. I mean, I just dragged up the latest figures. 81% has been counted there. Donald Trump's on 53%. Joe Biden's on 45%.
Yeah, look, obviously, if there's disappointment there, it's that they had been hoping to flip some of those states. You know, it had been talked up a lot. We've been talking about it all night, the Florida, the North Carolina, and the Georgia. And it doesn't look like all those states may be flipped. We don't know yet. They haven't all been called. But the fact that he lost Florida, look, Donald Trump was ahead, even in the final polls, by 1 to 2 points in the Florida state polls in the days leading up to the campaign. It is not a shocker that Florida went to Donald Trump. What Joe Biden's basically doing is, this is one of the many scenarios that we foresaw. No, essentially, he's recognizing this wasn't the landslide we had hoped for. Sure, that's a bit of a disappointment. That's sort of, the undertone in what he just said. But this is not over. He said it ain't over till every ballot's counted. And that has been perhaps the salient theme of Joe Biden's campaign, the absolute urgency of everyone voting and of every vote ultimately being counted. This election has been a battle in many respects between those who want the votes to be counted and those who would prefer that they're either not counted or counted a lot slower and that they end sooner.
Well, let's get some reaction from Democrats. Joining us is lecturer in rhetoric and human rights, usually based here in Paris at Sciences Po University, but is in the US at the moment. He's been a witness for voter protection for Joe Biden. Lex Paulsen, thanks very much for being with us. I don't know whether you heard Joe Biden there, but Joe Biden was saying he believes he's on track to win. Keep the faith. It isn't over till every ballot's been counted. Are you feeling like that, looking at the results coming in at the moment?
Well, there's still quite a lot. No, I'm here in Philadelphia, where we had very strong turnout in the city and the Democratic-leaning suburbs, but where many of the mail-in ballots have not been counted because of the restrictive rules on counting passed by the Republican legislature that forbade these counties from beginning to do their counts of the mail-in ballots until this morning. And so, as with Michigan and Wisconsin, because of the law, we will have to wait until all those votes are counted before we know if Pennsylvania will swing back to the Democrats.
I assume this is on Twitter. Donald Trump's been talking as well, saying we are up big, but they're trying to steal the election. Perhaps a comment that not that surprising.
Yeah, I would say, having been at the polls all day today from 6:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., I was encouraged by the fact that our worst fears about voter intimidation, suppression, disruption at the polls themselves did not come to pass. That's very good news. But what we will have to see tomorrow is whether the Republicans continue their attempts through the courts to stop votes from being counted. And these include many millions of absentee ballots that were cast legally, but that Republicans, because they've become the party of voter suppression, are trying to block.
I know it's very early, but let's be honest, the Democrats were hoping maybe not for a whitewash, but for a very strong showing for Joe Biden. That appears that it's not going to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, we can't pretend otherwise. We were hoping for a much better result, but there are still two clear paths for Biden to win the presidency and for Democrats to win the Senate and keep the House. So it's still very possible that Democrats will control both houses of Congress and the presidency if all the votes are counted.
We shall wait and see. Lex Paulsen, thanks very much for joining us. Lex Paulsen, lecturer in Sciences Po in Paris, currently in Philadelphia, as we were saying there. Let's show you the latest map then. We brought you that news of Florida being called for Donald Trump a very few seconds ago. And you can see, we can see rather, that the current Electoral College votes are that Joe Biden's on 223, Donald Trump on 174, but still all those states in white there, of course, all still to declare, some of them the crucial ones as well. Let's have a little bit more detail. Then Solange Moujane has got the very latest results for us here on France 24.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's take a look at the Electoral College math. Let's start with that. Joe Biden is at 223, Donald Trump 174. Biden still has a slight lead over Donald Trump, but again, there are major swing states that are still waiting. And Donald Trump has been having a pretty good night so far. That could change, but let's look at the state of Florida to see why Trump may be smiling at the White House right now. He has won the state by around a 3% margin. That's better than the margin he won 4 years ago when it was about 1% margin. Now, this state of Florida was one of those states that that Donald Trump absolutely had to win to be able to still be in the running for re-election. Now, Florida is a state that is generally very tight, and it looks like the Miami-Dade County was actually quite important for Trump. It is the most populous county in the state of Florida, and it's thought that Trump's messages against socialism and for law and order seemed to win over voters there. Now, again, Florida is one of those states that was really important for Donald Trump to win. Let's take a look at another state that was important for him to win as well, Ohio. It has 18 electoral votes, not as many as Florida, but still important nonetheless. Donald Trump won it by 53.5% against Joe Biden's 45%. Now, Ohio is important in the sense that because of the past. Ohio, in the past 14 elections, has sided with the winner. So that could be good news for Donald Trump. However, it is still early days. As Joe Biden said, there are many votes that are still, and many states that are still yet to come in. Let's take a look at another nail-biter that, to a certain extent, wasn't expected. The Congress, the House of Representatives. The House in 2018 won a majority here, and they had a surge in 2 years ago of 40 seats in 2018, and Republicans had been trying to sort of eat away at that gain. There were 35 seats that they were trying to get back, and right now it is very, very close in the House of Representatives.
Solange, thanks very much. Solange continues, keeps up to date with the latest results. She'll be here through the next couple of hours as well. But Eve Irvine will be your host. I'll be back in a couple of hours' time, as will Doug Herbert, an international affairs expert who's been giving us his analysis as well. Going to take a very short break from here in the studio, though, bring you one of our American views. This is from voters in Arizona.
Good girls. Let's get some more chicken shots. Come on.
For the most part, Melissa Owens lives a peaceful life.
Come on.
Her ranch is near the Mexican-American border, but far from pretty much everything else. And that isolation makes her more alert to the possible dangers.
Borders everywhere are dangerous. I have to be careful. I have to be on my toes to live here. But, well, it looks pretty peaceful to me today.
She doesn't always live in isolation, though. Melissa regularly sees migrants crossing her property, coming in from Mexico. She is armed to protect herself and will call Border Patrol when necessary, but still doesn't understand the point of a wall through her rural land.
No one wants a safe, secure border more than I, because I live here. But the answer isn't a barrier, and we need to be building bridges and working with people there.
Just an hour and a half east of Melissa's ranch, the town of Nogales has a very different border experience.
It's really the most unique city for me along the 2,000 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border, because literally you have one town that's split down the middle with the wall.
Alex Lapierre works for the nonprofit Border Community Alliance and has always maintained a good relationship with his Mexican neighbors, including an important economic one.
Billions of dollars worth of Mexican produce crosses here in Nogales.
He says the reality is nothing like the perception.
It seems like in the United States, the further away you are from the border, the bigger the myth of the border is. A lot of people think that this area is like a war zone. They think there's landmines, people everywhere has M16s.
But that economic relationship has been further threatened because of COVID-19. Stores like Evan Corey's are feeling the impact.
Non-essential travel is just banned. When that happens, the majority, 95% of our customer base is stopped from coming to shop.
The main street used to run directly between the two countries, but the government has been gradually adding more and more of a separation. In 2018, President Trump strengthened the barrier even more by adding barbed wire to the wall that already existed.
Yeah, the wire is, we kind of have to force ourselves to ignore it because it's just too depressing to think about what it symbolizes. Everyone from Nogales that grew up here has family on both sides of the border, so to stay on one side is completely unnatural for us here.
Last year, an art gallery opened just a few feet from the wall to add some beauty to the area, a form of resistance for the people of Nogales who do not want a wall through their town.
I'm Gene Kang. I'll be live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Melissa Caberly with live coverage from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Clovis Casali, and I'll be reporting from Miami, Florida.
I'm Florence Vilmino, and I'll be live from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
And I'm Jessica Lemazurier reporting from New York City.
I'm Ketevan Gorjestani in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
On election night, watch all the news unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
Special event.
It's an unprecedented election in the U.S., and we're ready to bring you unprecedented coverage here on France 24.
With our teams both here in Paris and across the United States, we'll have all of the results minute by minute and analysis from our team of experts.
Join us for an election night that could change the course of history, not only for the United States, but for the entire world.
Watch events unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
I'm Gene Kang. I'll be live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Melissa Caberly with live coverage from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Clovis Casali, and I'll be reporting from Miami, Florida.
I'm Florence Vilmino, and I'll be live from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
And I'm Jessica Lemazurier reporting from New York City.
I'm Ketevan Gorjestani in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
On election night, watch all the news unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
Hello and a very warm welcome to you if you're just joining us here on France 24. Our special US election coverage continues. It's still too early to call it. Lots of states still counting, notably in some of the vital swing states, but so far not seeing the move to the left that many were expecting. With the latest news we're getting that Florida has gone to Donald Trump. We're going to be crossing over to our correspondents in Florida, also in Arizona, and we'll be taking a look at the money matters in this election in the coming half hour of the programme. We'll be talking to senior economist at the Centre for Economic and Policy Research. But first, let's take a look at the results so far. Joe Biden has spent the night watching those returns come in from his home in Delaware. And while many states are still too close to call, despite Florida being cold, Joe Biden was eager to remind people that patience is necessary for now. Are expecting to take a quick listen to the extract of Joe Biden, who spoke just a little bit earlier, saying many of the key swing battlegrounds remain to be counted, saying it could in fact take a number of days to have those official results. But let's take a look at the general trend as things stand. Currently, here is the picture across the United States. You can bring up the map for you. Let's cross. Solange Brujon is in studio to give us an overview of those results.
As we can see on the East Coast, it's generally blue. Same thing on the West Coast. No surprise there. Red in the middle, again, no surprise there as well. However, there have been some positive things for Donald Trump this evening. Florida, or this morning, as I should say, here in Paris. Florida, the 29 electoral college votes of Florida, they have gone to Donald Trump. This was a major necessity for the president if he had any hopes of winning re-election. Now, Florida is so important because it has 29 electoral college votes, but also because it's often been in the past a tie state where the margins are very close. Trump won Florida by 1% last time. This year, his margins are quite better, around 3%. And so it looks like Trump's call for a push for law and order and calls against socialism seem to manage really well, especially in the Miami-Dade County. Another state, though, that Joe Biden is hoping to win that could potentially sway the tides for him is Arizona. Now, Arizona has not been called yet, but it will be essential for and very important for Joe Biden to win there. Now, Arizona has 11 electoral votes. It used to be a reliable Republican state, a stronghold for Republicans, but that's changing because of changing demographics, especially Latino voters and also white voters as well. The Hispanic vote there will be very important for potentially either candidate. The Hispanic vote, for example, in Florida was very important for Donald Trump, pushing things in his favor. So we'll have to wait and see how things go. But there's still a lot that will come in that could change the tide of this election. It is a nail-biter, though. It's not the blue wave Democrats were hoping for.
Indeed. Still a long way to go. Solange, thanks a lot for that. Of course, you'll be staying beside us here in studio and bringing us the latest results throughout the programme. Well, as Solange was mentioning there, one of the swing states, Florida, with its 29 electoral votes, it has gone to incumbent Donald Trump. That is the biggest prize among the traditional battleground states. Texas has become somewhat of a swing state this year. It has 39 votes. But back in Florida, France 24's Clovis Casali is in Miami and standing by to speak to us. Clovis, many there were expecting Florida to be almost too close to call, but it has now been called 51.3% to Donald Trump and Joe Biden quite a bit behind.
Certainly big disappointment for the Democrats who were hoping, who were dreaming of winning Florida, this so important battleground state. And they lose to Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who gets a little more than 51% of the ballot, and he needed this victory in the Sunshine State desperately in his bid for re-election. Interesting to see that when Joe Biden addressed supporters a few minutes ago, he did not mention Florida. He mentioned other states. He said that it's not over, that every vote needs to be counted, but he didn't mention Florida. All of the Democrats we spoke to here did think that it was feasible, that they could beat Donald Trump, who won 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton. And when you look at the numbers here in Florida, it's interesting also to see that Joe Biden did well in the big cities and the suburbs. The big cities such as Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, Orlando. But for instance, when you take Miami, he didn't do as well as Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. So he didn't get that margin he needed. Possibly because Donald Trump campaigned hard here. He put a lot of effort. He came here last Sunday for a big rally with thousands of supporters, a rally we attended, and we met many Latino and Cuban American voters who seemed convinced by Donald Trump and his rhetoric, saying that Joe Biden was a socialist, a communist, a threat for American values. Today we're also at a polling station in Little Havana, a neighborhood in Miami, and we met many voters there who were convinced that Donald Trump was still the best man to run the country. So tonight, Florida has gone for the Republicans, and Joe Biden will have to look at other paths to victory.
Indeed, as you say there, Clovis, the Latino vote is something we think of when we think of Florida, even if it is quite different there from other states in the US. Do you think that was the main dividing line in this election campaign, or were other demographics at play there in Florida or other issues?
Well, that was certainly an important point. It has to be stressed that it's especially the older generations, if you will, of Cuban Americans and Latinos who are diehard supporters of Donald Trump. People who left South America or Cuba, who left left-wing regimes and who have a real disgust for Fidel Castro or other left-wing leaders. But then you also have people, we met a lot of people here, younger voters, who like Donald Trump, who like that outspoken, as they say, personality. A man they see who's a successful, according to them, businessman and who speaks his mind. So that did appeal to them. And there's also the issue of pensioners. You do know that there's a lot of pensioners here in Florida, a high percentage of senior voters. And the question was, would these senior voters decide to turn their back on Donald Trump, even senior voters among the Republican circles, because of Donald Trump's controversial handling of the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll have to see later when the results are analyzed further whether these pensioners, for instance, voted for Biden or for Donald Trump. But truly tonight, the Republicans aren't really interested in that. They can focus on other parts of the United States. They won here in Florida, the Sunshine State, and that's exactly what they wanted.
Clovis Casale in Miami for now. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we can cross now to Alyssa Caverly, who's in Phoenix, Arizona for us, a state with 11 electoral votes, traditionally Republican, but that could be about to change. Alyssa, what's the latest you're hearing from there as that count continues?
That's right. We have every indication that Arizona is potentially going to flip to blue, although we can't officially call it. We have about 76% of the votes in, and Joe Biden is leading over Donald Trump here in Arizona. So the atmosphere here, we're at a local branch in Maricopa County of Democrat supporters, and they are very optimistic that this state will flip, and it could potentially be the only state to flip. Basically, most of the states have remained consistent with party votes. So Arizona would be potentially the one state that was Republican and could now turn Democrat. And that would be the first time that it is Democrat since 1996 when Arizona voted for Bill Clinton. And I want to note, before that, it was 1952 that Arizona voted for a Democratic candidate. So this is a big deal here in Arizona for that big switch. Most of that is because of the increase in Latino voters. Now, you just talked to in Florida about Latino voters there who are very big Trump supporters, and those are Cuban Latinos. Here in Arizona, it is mostly Mexican Latinos, and they are very much Biden supporters. They don't like Trump's policies, especially around immigration. Obviously, that is a big issue for a lot of Mexican Latino voters here in Arizona.
Now, Alyssa, you were just saying it there. Arizona might be the state to change from a tradition when it comes to those party lines. We're hearing that Donald Trump has taken Texas. That's 38 electoral seats there, gone once again to Donald Trump. No surprises there in that neighbouring state to where you are.
There wasn't really any surprises, although every election year we are looking at Texas. It is considered a purple state because it is so close in terms of the votes. We haven't counted all of the votes, and as Joe Biden said just a few moments ago, we need to be patient, but it does look like Texas will remain Republican again this election cycle. Again, Texas is one of those ones that could go either way. I think the Democrats were really hoping that Texas would be a big win for them and it would be their direct path to victory to the White House. That is not the case this year.
Okay, Alyssa Cavalry in Arizona for now. Thanks indeed. We will, of course, be checking back in with you as we get more results. France 24's Cole Stangler is with us on set throughout the programme. Cole, looking there at some of the key swing states, Trump has been winging bigger proportions of the Latin vote than 4 years ago, it looks.
That's right. We were hearing just before. I think it's important to stress that this isn't a homogenous voting bloc. You know, when we're talking about Florida, we have more Cuban Americans. Arizona, as we heard, more Mexican Americans. So you also have breakdown by socioeconomic level, so a diverse population. But all that being said, Trump appears to, according to exit polls that we've seen so far, be picking up some ground when you compare the vote that Hillary Clinton got back in 2016. Just to give you a few key battleground states, so in Florida, Georgia, and Ohio, 3 key states in this election, you actually have Biden losing significant support among Latino voters. And it's interesting because Democrats have this sort of optimism about demographics swinging in their favor. We heard that mostly in the Sun Belt states, states like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona as well, this idea that demography is going to play in Democrats' favor. And that's true to some extent, but as we're seeing tonight, that's not enough to get across the finish line. You need to give people a reason to come out and vote for you. And what we're seeing is, perhaps parts of the population that Democrats thought they could count on were not turning out for Democrats. In Florida, one of the key factors for Biden's defeat in Florida was Miami-Dade County, a county that Biden was simply not able to run up the score in, which is really necessary for Democrats to get the victory. So fairly disappointing so far.
Tell us a little bit more about the demographics that the Democrats count on. We know that they expect more of the overall Latino vote, maybe the black vote, and perhaps the youth vote.
That's right. So in general, Democrats, and I think we'll see some more credible national exit polling coming out, younger voters tend to vote Democratic. We're also seeing the Democrats getting more senior votes this year in particular with the COVID pandemic, senior citizens voting more Democratic. Another key part of this race, and we saw it in 2018, was the suburbs. So large cities and also the suburbs. We saw that Democrats were hoping maybe that population growth in cities and suburbs would be able to get them across the finish line in Texas, potentially in Georgia as well. It's looking very tricky for them in that respect. So the suburbs, another key part, but is it really going to be enough? That's the question. On the flip side, Donald Trump, his base, as in 2016, is really with white voters without college educations, typically. And that block has, and actually if you look at the numbers so far in some states, we're seeing Biden pick up some ground there, but that overall is the Trump electorate, and by what we're seeing right now, they're continuing to turn out.
Indeed, of course, it's still too early to call the election, but we are seeing a current trend in favor of Donald Trump, who nonetheless has taken to Twitter to once again suggest that the vote could be fraudulent.
That's right. And this is a scenario that Democrats were preparing for, Democratic strategists. I was also shown a document from the AFL-CIO, internal documents from the AFL-CIO, the biggest labor confederation in the U.S., preparing for just this scenario, a scenario in which the vote has not been fully counted. It's really important to stress that the vote has not been fully counted. You have states that are counting the vote, but nonetheless, Donald Trump saying that he's going to win and that there's fraud taking place. And we're seeing that scenario play out right now. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next few days. If there are plans to potentially mobilize protests, to get people out in the streets. I know that's what some in organized labor were talking about, and potentially others as well as part of that broad Democratic left coalition. Because frankly, it's not that surprising, as shocking as this might seem to have the U.S. president reacting this way. You had people actually anticipating just this scenario.
Indeed, it sounds like there could be angry unrest on either side of that divide when those final results come in. But of course, we are still currently a long way off from now. We can speak, though, however, to American economist and the co-founder of the Senior at the Center of Economic and Policy Research, Mr. Dean Baker. Thanks for your time. We were just, getting the latest results. Trump taking Florida, for example, also Texas, which we expected to be perhaps more in question this time round. But looking at the money side of things, Trump, the businessman, he didn't exactly focus on the finance in those final rallies. I imagine, at least in part, this is down to the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and something he got largely criticized for.
Yeah, well, he largely ran on who he was, and that was, to put it crudely, racist, nationalist. And he did say, he could point to this. Prior to the pandemic, the economy was doing good. And, how much credit he should get for that's a very good question. Basically, it was continuing the growth we had seen in the Obama-Biden administration. But people go, where are we? And the fact was the economy continued to grow. The unemployment rate fell. So a lot of people had been doing pretty well prior to the pandemic. So he could point to that. And then he treated the pandemic, he referred to it as the plague. He'd throw in a little racism there. He'd call it the China plague. and take no responsibility, quite literally. He said, I don't take any responsibility. He was asked once at a press conference, I take no responsibility. So he treated we have over 240,000 deaths now. He just treated this like, oh, he had nothing to do with that, nothing you could do. When, of course, we know there was a lot you could do, and many countries have dealt with it much, much better than the United States. But it became kind of a thing that, okay, Biden thinks we should wear masks. Biden thinks we should social distance. I think we should get everyone together in big rallies and all yell, for Donald Trump. So that really became front and center.
Indeed, when you look at Trump's campaign for this election, he once again promised millions of more jobs, 10 million, in fact, within 10 months if re-elected. He once again said that when it came to taxes, he would be reducing them for big businesses. I mean, that, I imagine, gained a lot of support with major CEOs across the country. But overall, how do you think his first 4 years in office left things financially for people in the more rural areas?
Well, it was a mixed bag. I mean, his trade wars certainly were not helpful, but on the other hand, he did have really massive bailouts, and it was striking. I'll confess, I actually didn't realize the president's power here, because there's residual authority for him essentially to give subsidies to farmers without congressional approval. So a lot of farmers actually did pretty well in spite of the trade war. They weren't necessarily doing great. But Trump could say, oh, I was taking care of you, and to a large extent he was. So rural areas, I'm not going to say they're doing great, but they're doing okay. Part of the story also, we have a big issue here in the United States, fracking. We've had an explosion of fracking in large parts of the country, certainly in Pennsylvania, which is big right now, obviously. And he would take credit for that. Now, for better or worse, that was also the Obama-Biden administration's policy. They were also very supportive of fracking. So that wasn't really qualitative change. The big difference is that Biden, and give Obama some credit here, they did want to have some regulation of that, whereas Trump basically has said, do whatever you want.
Indeed, Joe Biden going into this campaign speaking a bit about that Green Deal, indeed promising trillions of dollars to move towards cleaner energy, also saying he'd like to raise corporate taxes to between 20 and 28%, and the minimum wage bringing it up to $15 an hour. How different do you think the American economy would be under Joe Biden?
I think it'd be a qualitative difference. I mean, Trump benefited enormously from the fact that he had a pretty healthy economy. So it's sort of like, well, I'm going to give a baseball analogy, probably a bad analogy for France, but take a soccer game. You replace the goalie and you're ahead 5-0 in the last 5 minutes, and then your replacement goalie only lets in one goal and then takes credit for the victory. That's sort of the story here. So he benefited from that, but in terms of staging a recovery from the pandemic, I don't think he has any clue what he's doing. He's sort of throwing policies out there, and the reality is most of the serious economists who he had, or I should say people familiar with economic policy, I'm not going to care whether they're economists or not, they've left his administration. So he has people who are basically PR people who are going to be deciding policy, and where that goes, I don't know. Whereas Biden has pretty specific plans for having an aggressive policy, Green New Deal, whether you call it that or not, promoting clean energy, promoting child care, ramping up public support for health care, which would both meet real needs for large segments of the population and also provide us a very clear path for recovery. So I think we would be talking about a very different scenario in a Biden administration than in a Trump administration.
Indeed, healthcare, one of the main issues they differ on as well. But you mentioned there a little bit earlier, Mr. Baker, that China-US trade relations, hearing again from Donald Trump that, he's going to establish 1 million domestic jobs that were previously based in China if re-elected. During the last 4 years, we have seen a pretty significant, at least on a surface level, trade war between those two nations. How do you see that going forward?
Well, it will matter hugely whether Trump ends up back in the White House or whether Vice President Biden ends up pulling this out. We aren't going to be back where we were before President Trump took office. We've changed our relations with China. But the question is whether we could have sort of a rational path going forward. I mean, Trump basically, someone made the comment, I forget where I'm stealing this from, that he governs by temper tantrum. And, China's a major power. In many ways, it's the equal or even even larger economy than the U.S., and we can't push them around. So what we have to figure out, if you want to have serious relations with China, is what are the key issues that we should be upset about? We'll have to make concessions. We can't just hand China a laundry list and say, hey, we want you to do A, B, C, D, and E. They'll throw it in the garbage can. So you have to have a clear idea of what you're trying to do. And I've seen absolutely zero evidence of what Trump is trying to do except pick a fight. And if you do that, the United States obviously is a huge power. We could pick a fight with small countries, with Mexico. We could push them around, largely get our way. We can't do that with China. And anyhow, so I'm not going to say I know exactly what Vice President Biden would do as president, but I think he would at least have a clear strategy. I may not agree with it, but if you don't have a clear strategy when you look to confront China, you're probably not going to get very far.
Overall, Mr. Baker, how do you see the U.S. at an international standing since Donald Trump took office?
Well, obviously, the U.S. standing has plunged, and that's been kind of by choice. I mean, Trump quite clearly has contempt for international institutions. Currently, obviously, the big one, WHO, he's pulling us out of the World Health Organization. We haven't cooperated at all in trying to develop a vaccine, something which actually might backfire for us because it looks like China is ahead of us in developing a vaccine, and it would have been fantastic, well, both for the world and for people here, if we had collaborated with them. So we would have earlier access to it, but so would other countries as well if we were doing this jointly. But he has open contempt. So I'm not trying to read anything into what he says. He has open contempt for international institutions. And obviously, other countries recognize that, and they realize, okay, the United States is not a serious player internationally. They're going to do whatever Donald Trump feels like. So, yeah, our standing has fallen enormously, and it's a very, very different world. I'm not always happy with what prior presidents had done with NATO, with our international alliances, but to my view, it was at least valuable that they did try to cooperate with other nations rather than basically give them a middle finger and just say, we don't care what you think, we're going to do what we want.
Mr. Dean Baker, Senior Economist at the Centre for Economic and Policy Research, coming to us live from Washington. Thanks indeed for your time. Well, as we were saying throughout the morning, votes still being counted in many of the crucial states. Currently still, if we take a look at the global picture, neck and neck this race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. They're within a percentage point of each other. Let's cross over to Solange Moujon, who can bring us the latest roundup.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Lone Star State, a generally Republican stronghold, the state of Texas. Now, the state of Texas has 38 electoral college votes, and it went red for Donald Trump by what is thought to be, again, we don't have the definitive results, these are projections, but it has gone red 52% for Donald Trump, 46% for Joe Biden. That could change a little bit as the rest of the votes from cities like Dallas and Houston come in. Now, why was Texas important? Well, Democrats thought they had a chance there. There's a changing demographic that's coming on in Texas, especially in cities. Younger, college-educated white voters are moving to Texas's cities and shifting the makeup of the state. It has also been a state where they've spent a ton of money, Democrats and Republicans alike. Now, so this means that the win for Donald Trump is important for him. It means that the Republicans have been able to hold on to the Lone Star State. Now, if we look at the map of the U.S., we can get an idea that for the most part, states have been going in the direction that they usually do. The Northeast has been going blue, the South red, the West Coast blue as well. Now, this doesn't mean that Texas's win for Trump doesn't mean necessarily, for example, that Biden's out of the running. There is the blue wall up here, and that means if Biden wins these, he still has a very good shot. Again, this is a nail-biter. It's not what Democrats had hoped for. It's not the blue wave landslide that many Democrats had wanted. Now, if we look at the Electoral College vote numbers, we can see that Joe Biden is at 224, Donald Trump is at 212. That margin that we saw earlier is getting smaller, but again, there are major swing states that could be coming in quite soon, or actually in many days. We don't know yet.
Indeed, so much yet to discover. Solange, for now, thanks a lot for that. The latest wrap up there on the figures. You can see Joe Biden 224 to Donald Trump's 212, inching ever closer to that 270 electoral votes needed to clinch a win. You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. Our non-stop coverage of US elections continues. We're going to be speaking to correspondents in Washington and Los Angeles in a few minutes, and we'll be getting the perspective on the latest developments from Professor of American Studies here in Paris, author of a book on the Latinization of America, Mr. Jim Cohen. Cole Stangler remains on set with us throughout the programme. Well, we're seeing there once again latest results coming in. Joe Biden, meanwhile, has spent the night watching those returns come in from his home in Delaware. Many states still too close to call, notably in those battleground states. Florida has gone to Donald Trump. Texas also, which was in question, looks like it is going to remain a Republican state. Joe Biden, however, warning people that it is all still to play for and calling for patience.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted.
Okay, well, we're going to cross now to our Washington correspondent, Ketevan Gorjestani, who joins us live. Ketevan, you know, as we've been saying throughout the morning, all still to play for. We're not by any ways or means there yet, but we have seen Florida go to Donald Trump. Texas also looks like it will remain Republican. He's also, if I remember correctly, taken Ohio. It looks like he is currently coming out on front.
Yes, I mean, the president is definitely doing much better than a lot of people, especially on the left, expected, and much better than most of the polls had suggested. So if you're in the president's campaign right now, you're feeling pretty confident, at least much better than you would have if some of those states hadn't gone for you. So there's Florida, which we had been saying for days now that if Donald Trump couldn't win Florida, it was almost over. It is not over for Donald Trump. He won Iowa, won Ohio. So these are good signs for Donald Trump. That said, the speech that Joe Biden gave is very important because that is exactly what you're seeing in the numbers as to what can happen in Michigan, in Wisconsin, and in Pennsylvania. Because the breakdown between early voting and mail-in early voting is very important, and the way it is counted is also very important. Let me give you the example of the state of Michigan, where Donald Trump is currently looking like he's in the lead. About less than 60% of votes are reported right now. But among those less than 60% of votes, there's just a sliver of these votes that have so far been counted that are early voting ballots or mail-in ballots, just about 2%. And we know from the breakdown, the partisan breakdown of those mail-in votes, those early votes, that they are skewed towards the Democrats. So you could still see very well Joe Biden, once those mail-in ballots, which are going to be numerous, once they're counted, you could see that swing towards Biden happen. And that is why the former vice president seems to be so confident about the Midwest. And it's something similar in Pennsylvania, even though the numbers are not as huge, that could still happen in Pennsylvania. And that is why Joe Biden is focusing on these states. He feels good about it because he feels good about the early voting in his favor. The question is, will there be enough of those early voters in favor of Joe Biden to counterweight the election day votes for Donald Trump?
The Michigan there, Ketevan, the state that you mentioned, it had traditionally, of course, been a Democrat-leaning state, but they lost it already in 2016. It is a state with 16 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, meanwhile, with 20 electoral votes. And we could be waiting quite a long time to get the results from that particular state. We already had the court there, you know, say that ballots could be counted up to the 6th of November, something Donald Trump has said is very unfair. And he continues to question the legality of this vote in many areas.
Yes, and he just did it again just recently, just minutes after the former vice president finished speaking. Donald Trump tweeted that they were trying to steal the election and that these things were not fair and that the ballots should not be cast after the polls close. Now, to be very clear, when your mail-in ballot or your early vote is counted after the closing of the polls, it doesn't mean you're casting your ballot after the polls close. You've casted it a long time ago, probably. It's just that the system makes it that it is being counted a little bit later. But Donald Trump has been really criticizing all these early mail-in ballots for months now. It's not just something that he's started doing recently. Ever since the pandemic hit and states decided that they wanted to help out people to go vote by sending those mailing ballots, by making it easier for people to early vote, to vote by mail, Donald Trump has criticized this, calling it, saying that it would result in a mass fraud, and criticizing those mailing ballots, criticizing the decision by the Supreme Court to extend the deadlines to receive them and to count them. And so he's attacking that, even though a lot of his voters actually do use mail-in ballots. I'm thinking, of course, of the military, those members who are overseas, they vote by mail. The seniors, a lot of them also vote by mail. So it's not really clear why he's trying to do this and why he's attacking those mail-in ballots so much, because they could still play in his favor.
The questions over the vote, though, does seem to have led to a rise in tensions across the United States. We've been seeing throughout the week from Portland and Oregon to New York, businesses and shop fronts boarding up their windows and doors, fearful of violence. What's the atmosphere like in Washington?
Well, the same scenes are true here in Washington, D.C. The stores started boarding up their storefronts last week, actually, slowly getting ready for this election night. The security around the White House compound, around that Lafayette Square, which had already been barricaded during the protests this summer, you saw those barricades growing higher, growing larger, growing wider, and taking up more and more space, of course, getting prepared for what could happen. It looks more like people preparing for the worst rather than being sure that something is going to happen. But we did see a few hundred people marching earlier in the night towards Lafayette Square, towards that White House. Of course, Lafayette Square has that street, 16th Street, which has been renamed Black Lives Matter Plaza, where those protests were taking place earlier this year. And we saw a few people going there. So far, it seems to be a relatively calm, people just gathering there. But the worry is across the country that the more we wait for those results, the more the tensions and the stress could, verse into violence. But people really preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
Van Gorgisani in Washington for now. Thanks indeed. Well, California, meanwhile, is the state with the highest number of electoral votes up for grabs, 55 of them. But it has long been a Democrat stronghold, and that goes unchanged. Jean Kang is standing by there to bring us the latest. Jean, Joe Biden declared the winner in California. Was there ever any doubt?
You know, that's because here in California, the whole state has been Democratic since the year 1988, when it really switched over from a majority Republican to Democrat. That's why those 55 electoral college votes, also first reported by the U.S. media as well, have gone to Joe Biden. So they are now voting in his favor. However, the state of California is now looking through the rest of the nation and how each swing state moves forward. As we know, there are several battleground states, including including Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But in light of this, as those vote results are still coming out, it may be into the very late night and early morning hours before we finally find out who is going to actually win, if it's going to be President Donald Trump, who takes another 4 years, or if it's the Democratic candidate Joe Biden. But I do want to talk a little bit more about gun purchases. For the very first time here in California, gun purchases have gone up. Many times people are now saying that they are scared about a possible government collapse or even fears over the pandemic. Where I am here in Hollywood, we have moved locations as we're moving into the evening hours, into the nighttime hours here in California. But as you see on my right, there are many businesses, hundreds of them, that have boarded up. They are being proactive. That's because many of these streets have seen Black Lives Matter protesters fighting for racial equality and justice. But then there is another side, people who have purchase guns because they are just fearful over this pandemic and what could happen. In addition, President Donald Trump has really called many of these areas in California and other states lawless. And because of that, a new study shows that 76% of people believe there is lawlessness. As of right now, there are 44,000 people who have purchased guns, feeling that maybe this could make them a little bit safer. But right now, everyone is kind of on eggshells, not only waiting for those poll results and the election results tonight here in California and throughout all of America, but unfortunately, it looks like there is a bit of fear as to what could happen to the future of America.
Indeed, it sounds like quite a lot of tension there in California, and also a lot of major issues coming up for voters there, from the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic to racism in the United States. Is also something we're hearing in California. There was quite a big push for control of these campaigns on social media. Can you tell us a bit how that played out this year? It was such a major player 4 years ago.
That is true. Ever since the 2016 election, social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, they have been really working hard, according to their CEOs, especially in the 2020 election, because there have been a lot of back and forth issues between Democrats and Republicans, claiming that the social media platforms are not doing enough, whether they're not giving enough advertisement, even a week before the actual election today. So they have said that they're going to make sure that there is a check and balance of disinformation that is out there. Unfortunately, a lot of American voters, instead of looking to the media or doing research themselves, many go to social media and sometimes blindly follow or just believe whatever information is out on social media. As we know from the 2016 election, there is a lot of election fraud, a lot of information that is just not true that is put out there. That's why the CEOs of these companies say that they are going to work on both sides of the aisle, for Republicans as well as Democrats, to make sure that the information that is put out there is honest and forthcoming.
Indeed.
Live here in Hollywood, we're going to send it back to you for now.
And thanks a lot to Jean Kang there in Los Angeles. Indeed, of all the more importance that information is correctly transmitted when you have tensions rising. Well, we can speak now to Professor of American Studies at the Sorbonne University here in Paris and author of Spanglish America, The Challenges of the Latinization of the US and the Pursuit of Illegals. Mr. Jim Cohen, thanks for joining us. Given your expertise, maybe we'll start with a question on that Latino vote in the United States. It generally seemed to largely sway for the Democrat Party. How big a role do you think it has played this time around? It looks like Trump has taken more of that vote than he did 4 years ago.
Well, I think you've pointed to part of the problem here, and that is that it's very difficult to talk about a Latino vote as any sort of monolith. It's never really been that, even though it does sway nationally, largely toward the Democrats. There are places where that's not so much the case. It's less true in Florida. It's less true in Texas. And in Florida, that does seem to have made a difference in helping Trump to take that state. On the other hand, the Latino vote, I think when the analyses are done a few days from now and we can look more calmly at what's happened, I think that probably the youth Latino vote in Arizona helped the Democrats to take that state and to turn it blue. That's been the tendency for a while, and it's now a confirmed tendency.
The two candidates in these presidential elections so vehemently opposed when it comes to immigration. You have Donald Trump, who once again in this campaign period said he's going to continue with the construction of a wall along the border with Mexico. Joe Biden saying the first thing he'll do is stop it. Racism also a hot button topic in the US. How do you see voters' reaction to this issue? Does it break down on where people live in the United States, or is there a different division?
Well, it does break down. I mean, clearly on the two coasts, you see many more Democratic voters who are horrified by what they see in the way of division, the way that Trump has systematically stoked division between black and white, between immigrant and non-immigrant, between, all sorts of polarization has been going on, and Donald Trump has been stoking that and trying to put that to his advantage. I think that it's worth thinking about why that's the case, what all this polarization is useful for in Trump's mind and in his policy, because I think that a lot of this serves simply to divert attention from the socioeconomic aspect of his policies, which have been very inegalitarian, very ecocidal. And when you're busy getting divided and looking for enemies who are not the same color as you, you tend to be diverted a little bit from the economic effects of that president's policies. Something of that nature has been going on, I would say.
James Cohen, stay with us for a minute. I'm just going to bring in Cole Stangler, who's also with us here on set.
Sure.
Cole, we were looking there throughout this campaign. On the back of that, Joe Biden did present himself very much in this campaign as the man of decency, calling on people to vote against division.
That's right. We saw really after the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year, Joe Biden, if not necessarily adopting all of the policy aims of some of those people in the streets, but certainly embracing the rhetoric of this call for racial justice. And Joe Biden, in his own way, hearkening back, we know Trump has this sort of the Keep America Great slogan. Biden, in his own way, hearkening back to this era of American politics where people could get along. We saw one of his campaign mottos, slogans, was the battle for the soul of the country. And so Biden really presented himself as the candidate able, or as someone fighting to sort of restore this era in which Americans could get along with one another. And what we're seeing really tonight so far, and again, this morning, really in Paris, as the results continue to come in, of course it's not over, but the question is that rhetoric really enough to get people to come out and vote for you? You can talk about racial justice, you can give the slogan of Black Lives Matter, but what are you doing to fight against mass incarceration, for example? The fact that the United States has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the incarcerated population around the world. The fact that Black and Latinos are more likely to be incarcerated than their white counterparts. So issues like that, real concrete issues. And again, it's early. We're going to see what happens. But the question for Biden was he able to really, get people to come out and vote for him? What is Biden proposing to materially improve people's lives? And we'll see what happens. But so far, it's not super encouraging for the Democrats.
Indeed, Mr. Cohen, if you're still with us, that is a
Sure.
valid point. Donald Trump was very clear on his message. He rejected any idea that, racism was endemic in the U.S. police forces. He presented the Republican Party as the party of law and order. Do you think that that's where he may have proved successful?
I think that part of what's going on is that he was selling that message to people who live outside the cities. Much of the violence that has taken place in cities in recent months has been because of Trump's policy of sending federal agents, federal police forces to repress what are mostly peaceful demonstrations. And then he claims that there's violence, and he denounces that. And people who live outside the cities are led to be suspicious of people who live inside the cities, and that goes to his advantage in what are known as the red states.
Indeed, Mr. Cohen, thanks for your time. Cole, looking at it, this one clear message from Trump, people have started to talk about the Trumpization as well of the Republican Party, and it's something, you've been looking into, especially looking at the Congress race.
That's right. We've seen it happening. We've seen it happen over the last few years, really, under Trump. The Republicans, it also preceded Trump. Remember, Trump didn't come out of nowhere. Trump emerged out of this context in which Republican rhetoric was becoming increasingly extreme. the rhetoric against President Obama, the sort of conspiracy thinking. We've seen the development of the QAnon conspiracy theory, this idea that there's a Satanist a cabal that's running the country, and that Donald Trump is going to save the country. We've seen polls that show really an alarming number of people believing this conspiracy theory. And as it happens today, as we're seeing with the election results, we have at least one person in Congress so far has been elected who's a believer in the QAnon conspiracy theory here in the state of Georgia. Again, in a very rural conservative part of the state, Marjorie Taylor Greene. But she's essentially is a believer in this QAnon conspiracy theory. We also have another very far right, I think is an appropriate term to use here, candidate who was elected in North Carolina, who aligned himself very much with Trump's law and order rhetoric. Madison Cawthorn is his name, only 25 years old, elected in North Carolina to Congress. Someone who has made social media posts in which he referred to Hitler as the Fuhrer, talked about visiting Hitler's vacation home in Germany, and it had been on his bucket list, reacting very viciously tonight to his own election, tweeting and trying to bait people critical of him. And so, again, this didn't come out of nowhere. Candidates like this are emerging in a context in which Donald Trump is really using this law and order rhetoric to inflame tensions, flirt with conspiracy theories. Donald Trump himself doesn't say he believes in QAnon, but he's sort of flirted with this idea of the theory, in different ways. And this conspiracy theory way of thinking is becoming more prominent in the Republican Party, as is this really law and order white identitarian grievance politics that we're really seeing spread in the GOP.
Okay, Cole, for now, thanks indeed. Of course, the results still to come. We're keeping a close eye on developments for you, but there will, of course, either way, be big economic consequences to this election. Our business editor, Stephen Carl, joins us for more on this. Stephen, can we start with the stock markets? Investors, I imagine, trying to make sense of what is currently happening.
Just like the rest of us, really. Let's take a look at the markets that are currently trading in Asia. The Nikkei in Tokyo, one of the most significant markets in Asia, closing a short time ago, closing up 1.7% at the end of trading, and that's really where the Asian markets have been all throughout this session, showing gains, changing slightly. We're seeing the gains slightly moderated as the day's trading has gone on there. That's following on from a positive lead from Wall Street. But really things, of course, looking very volatile when we look into what's going to happen later in the day. Particularly, we're looking at the futures markets on Wall Street. This is pre-market trading gives us an indication of what might happen when in several hours' time we have the Wall Street markets open. Lots of volatility there too. A couple of hours ago, you were looking at significant gains across the three main American markets. A short time ago, the Dow was actually called to open lower at the start of trading, and certainly the gains moderated on the S&P as well. That was set to open around 0.5% higher a short time ago. Now, investors had been, we'd heard this from some market analysts that run up to this, the expectations of a blue wave and what that might mean for the markets. There are two schools of thought from market watchers on what the outcome of this election will mean for the markets. President Trump being re-elected would mean for investors potentially tax cuts, potentially more deregulation, particularly big tech. It could mean that those investigations into big tech companies might not be as severe under a Trump-led administration. Joe Biden seeing as a better bet for bigger stimulus for the economy, more spending, as that was a key part of his platform as well. So different factors for investors to try and figure out. Of course, they're following developments with the rest of us as well. The dollar, interestingly, trading more strongly overnight. That's what happens in uncertain times. The dollar is considered a safe haven currency. That's where people are putting their money right now.
This election is happening, of course, at a time when the United States is in the midst of a massive economic crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That will, whoever wins, going to be the major challenges of the next president.
The US economy pre-pandemic had been growing fairly consistently. Some economists say it was slightly overheated because of the tax cuts that were passed under the Trump administration. But when the pandemic struck, it was a brutal blow to the US economy. Between April and June, the economy shrank by 9%, a record fall for the US economy, plunging the country into recession. And although there has been a fairly significant bounce back since, we're still talking about a very bruised economy. The world's largest economy, which means, of course, there are global consequences to what happens in the United States. Now, the IMF saying that they're expecting the US economy to shrink by 4% for the entirety of 2020. The Federal Reserve, a similar figure, just under 4%, they're predicting the US economy to shrink by. Both organisations predicting a bounce back in 2021, but there's doubt being cast over that, particularly on the element of consumer confidence, because there is an issue, and this is something that economists have been raising, is that while businesses may reopen, if the health situation doesn't improve, people aren't going to feel confident about going out and spending their money in a restaurant or in a shop or leaving the house if they don't feel that they're going to be protected from a health point of view, that they won't be able to spend their money. And that means it could be years before we see the scars of this crisis eliminated.
Of course, a key part of the economic picture is unemployment. Where do you think stand?
Well, according to the most recent figures, which was for the week that ends the 10th of October, there are more than 22 million Americans claiming unemployment benefits. If you compare that to the same week in 2019, it was 1.4 million. So you are talking about a massive level of unemployment in the US. When we look at the percentage rate, which is calculated slightly differently, the unemployment rate in September was just under 8%. That has come down from a peak of almost 15% in May. So it is an improvement of the situation. But if you compare it to last year, we were talking about record low unemployment in September 2019 of 3.5%. Economists again say that the easy part is getting that first 20% of workers back to work. The more difficult part is getting the last 20%, because again, that's going to be dependent on demand and spending.
Now, a lot of people had been hoping it would actually be done before these elections, and now I imagine agreeing a new stimulus package for the economy will be a matter of urgency when lawmakers return to Washington.
These talks have been ongoing since the summer. There was no agreement found before the elections, before the Senate broke up for these elections. A couple of really urgent issues that need to be dealt with, particularly unemployment benefit. We were just talking about those 22 million people claiming unemployment benefits. The first stimulus package passed way back at the height of the first set of lockdowns, extended unemployment benefits in the United States, a $600 extra payment for many people. That expired at the end of July, which means those people are surviving without that money since then. There's also a question of extending how long you can claim unemployment benefits for. That has also been one of the things that's going to be left hanging by the current situation. Support for small businesses expired at the end of October, the end of September. That's going to be a huge issue as well for maintaining jobs. That was a grants and loans scheme that needs to be extended as well. There's been discussions about another round of stimulus checks, $1,200 already sent out earlier this year to American taxpayers. Is a question that they're talking about sending another round of those as well. That will help to stimulate the economy, help the recovery that we've just been talking about. Then there's the airline industry. Their benefits expired as well, and 30,000 workers were laid off as a result. You know, those workers waiting to see if there's going to be government help to get them back into work. The point that economists make on this is that the central bank has done everything it can. The Federal Reserve has made borrowing very cheap, made it possible for governments to spend the money. It's now up to Washington. It's up to the lawmakers to come up with an agreement. The US economy needs spending to be able to recover. It needs, and that has to come from the government at this stage. And that's a really key point that will lay on the table of the new president when they take office.
So yes, busy days ahead when they do get those results. Stephen Carroll, our business editor, thanks indeed for that. Of course, we are still hours, potentially days away from having the final results in these US elections. But Laurent Bersteker joins us now to take a look at how the newspapers are reacting to this vote. Take us through some reactions, first of all, Laurent, in the American papers.
Well, Eve, it's crunch time in the US, and many newspapers are framing this election as a crucial turning point for the future of the country. Let's start with The Guardian, which calls it a battle for America's soul, with the two candidates standing for fundamentally opposed values and principles and likely to take the country in radically opposite directions if they're elected. In another article, the newspaper even argues the vote is likely to shape the planet's future, as it says Biden is the only candidate who will take steps to protect the environment. Turning now to Politico, another newspaper, which also says America awaits the verdict on the Trump era and argues only a Democratic landslide could effectively turn the page on recent history, as even a narrow win for Biden would not convince Republicans to ditch Donald Trump. Unfortunately, it looks like that ship has already sailed. And finally, USA Today headlines with a picture of both candidates facing each other with this simple title, "Now it's up to you, America."
Well, the voting is over, but the counting continues. Now, there had been a lot of concerns raised about potential voter intimidation and violence. It seems to have unfolded largely without any incident. What are the papers saying?
Well, it was an election that passed mostly in peace after a season of fear, according to the Washington Post, with concerns of armed militias showing up at polls trying to intimidate voters, largely unfounded so far. The paper reports that despite some minor, mostly technical issues, the fear of this potential unrest did not materialize, did not happen, largely thanks to a massive police presence across the country. However, the article does warn violence could still unfold after the results are in.
That's something that international media are picking up on.
Well, that's right. And many foreign international newspapers are worried about how this violence could affect their communities in the U.S. or their diaspora. Let's look at the Jerusalem Post, for instance, which warns of unprecedented possibility for unrest, especially by far-right groups against Jewish communities in the U.S., especially in the event of a Joe Biden win. Arab News, meanwhile, also says America is preparing for post-electoral violence and argues the results could reignite the protests and unrest we've seen during the recent George Floyd protests.
Okay, well, you'll be back in 2 hours' time for another look at the papers, but for now, thanks indeed. We are expecting to hear from the current US President Donald Trump. He's going to speak normally in just a few minutes. We're going to take a very quick break, but we'll be back with updates after that. See you then. A very short break with you in a couple of minutes.
Breaking news on France 24 and France24.com.
Seulement à la Maison Blanche pour...
We're reporting from New York City.
Hang on, be live.
And our service. De l'élection.
I'm Gene Kang. I'll be live in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Melissa Kimberly with live coverage from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hi, I'm Clovis Casali, and I'll be reporting from Miami, Florida.
I'm Florence Villamino, and I'll be live from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
And I'm Jessica Le Masurier reporting from New York City.
I'm Ketevan Gorjestani in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
On election night, watch all the news unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
Special event.
It's an unprecedented election in the U.S., and we're ready to bring you unprecedented coverage here on France 24.
With our teams both here in Paris and across the United States, we'll have all of the results minute by minute and analysis from our team of experts.
Join us for an election night that could change the course of history, not only for the United States, but for the entire world.
Watch events unfold on France 24 and France24.com.
You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. Our US election coverage continues. Our correspondents in Washington and Philadelphia are standing by. Pennsylvania, of course, one of the crucial battleground states in this election, where there have been reports of a lot of disinformation circulating on social media there. We'll be hearing from Florence Villemour in just a few minutes. But first, let's cross to Solange Moujon with the latest results. Solange, still a neck-and-neck race at this point.
Yeah, and it's a real nail-biter for both Democrats and Republicans. It is not the blue wave the Democrats have been hoping for. Now let's take a look at the map of the United States to see how things are turning out. States that are generally red have been voting red, as you can see here in the middle and in the south, and then Democratic states in the northeast and along the western coastline have gone to the Democrats. There's some key states here that are important. Trump won Texas as well as Florida. However, that does not mean that the race is over for Joe Biden, and far from it. Let's take a look at what is called the blue wall, or the states up like Wisconsin. Now, the blue wall is states up here. Wisconsin is one of them. It has 10 electoral college votes. It is a competitive state. It leans Democrat. So Joe Biden, it's important for him to win that one, and to win the state of Michigan, another key blue wall state. And it's looking quite strong for Biden there. There are 16 electoral college votes that are up for grabs in Michigan. Trump won it by 0.2% 4 years ago, so Biden really wants to win that one, and it is important and key for him to win this blue wall, these Midwest states, in order to nab the 270 electoral votes that he needs. Another blue wall and vital state is Pennsylvania. Let's take a look at that state there. There we go. There are 20 electoral college votes up for grabs in Pennsylvania. We are not expecting those results right away. Donald Trump narrowly won the state by 44,000 votes. So 4 years ago, that was a small margin. We'll see this year if that 1% margin is going to be repeated. If you look at voter turnout for the moment, Trump is ahead, but that doesn't necessarily mean much because we're waiting for mail-in ballots, we're waiting for absentee ballots, we're waiting for a lot of big cities. So again, there are many swing states that are still up for grabs. The electoral college balance could sway very widely still. Biden is still in the race despite wins by Trump in places like Texas.
Indeed, to remind our viewers, of course, in Pennsylvania and most other 48 of the 50 states, in fact, it is a winner-takes-all scenario when it comes to those electoral votes. Well, we are expecting incumbent President Donald Trump to speak shortly from the White House, but we can cross in the meantime to Washington to get the latest from our correspondent there, Kedevan Gorgistani. Kedevan, we're hearing that Donald Trump is to make a nationwide address, but of course he has already been speaking on his favorite medium, the social media, recently.
Yes, he tweeted just minutes after Joe Biden wrapped up his remarks, and he went on the attack. Again, he accused the Democrats of trying to steal the election, saying that casting your ballots after the polls close was not right. He was aiming at those early votes and mail-in ballots that will be counted after Election Day, not actually cast, unlike what he was saying. So he continued what he had been doing for weeks leading up to that Election Day, which is attack the mail-in ballot system, attack these early votes. And he had already specifically targeted Pennsylvania, saying that there was something bad happening there, that he was going to keep a close eye on Pennsylvania. But of course, there are millions of mail-in ballots and early votes still to be counted in that state of Pennsylvania. So Donald Trump knows that he has done much better than a lot of experts and commentators were expecting, done much better than the polls suggested. So he has played defense well, defended all the states that he needed to defend so far, and we're holding out now on really the usual suspects that we knew we were going to be waiting for. And so we'll see what the tone of his remarks will be. Will it be continuing in the attack? in the criticism of the electoral process, or maybe starting to claim victory in states that have yet to be called. This is probably going to happen in a few minutes. Donald Trump, who has waited quite a while, remember just a few days ago, he was saying that he was going to call victory before the official results are in. So it was actually surprising to see Joe Biden speak before the president.
Indeed, surprising in that sense. As you say, Kedevan, a number of key states still to announce results. Georgia, Arizona, perhaps, too, that a lot of focus is now turning to. Also, as Solange was saying, there's the issue of those blue wall states, the ones that had been traditionally Democrat, like Michigan and Wisconsin, but which did go to Trump last time round.
Yes, but they went to Trump by a very narrow margin, just about around 10,000 votes. So it was always going to be very close. And right now you're seeing the president in the lead in those states. But when Joe Biden spoke during his remarks, he said that he was very confident about Wisconsin and Michigan. And the reason for that is that Donald Trump's lead it seems to be, at least for now, possibly an election day red mirage, which means that the election day votes are skewed in favor of Donald Trump, while the early and mail-in ballots seem to favor the Democrats, except those mail-in ballots and those early votes have barely started to be counted in those two states. So if that skewing in favor of the Democrats holds true in those two states, as you see those mail-in ballots and those early votes be counted and taking up more and more of a percentage of the total number of votes, you might see that Joe Biden number come up and Donald Trump come down. The question is, of course, will there be more of a blue wave in early voting or a bigger red wave in election day votes? That's what you have to keep looking at over the next few hours, possibly even days.
Kedevan, for now, thanks indeed. Well, indeed, that issue of postal votes and early votings will be key in one of the key battleground states we've been talking about, Pennsylvania. 20 electoral votes up for grabs there. Traditionally Democrat, but once again, Donald Trump did win there in 2016, and he has promised a court fight over absentee ballots. Courts ruled that mail-in votes can be counted even if they arrive after polling day, up in fact until November 6th. To get the latest from there, we can cross now to Florence Villeminot. Florence, we've been hearing that with about 70% of ballots counted, it looks like Trump is in the lead. What's the latest you're hearing on how the vote is going there?
Well, it's going to be a nail-biting finish here in Pennsylvania, and it could take several days to get the final election result. And a lot of that has to do with the unprecedented nature of this election. Massive turnout. Election officials are expecting a record turnout here in Pennsylvania, but also due to the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of voters resorted to mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. Of the 9 million voters in Pennsylvania, 2.5 million people mailed in their ballot. So as Ketevan was saying there, mail-in ballots tend to be more Democratic voters, whereas Republicans tend to vote on Election Day. So that could really change the polls that we're seeing here as they come in. So we have to be very careful with those prognostics. Wait until every single vote is counted. And it takes a long time to count these votes here in Pennsylvania for several reasons. The first one being that in Pennsylvania, you can only start counting ballots on Election Day, unlike other battleground states like Florida or North Carolina, where you can actually tally absentee ballots, mail-in ballots before, and then get that result really quickly on Election Day. Here in Pennsylvania, they only started counting the votes at 7 a.m. Also, the way people vote in Pennsylvania, when you're mailing in that ballot, when you're doing the absentee ballot, well, you have two envelopes. You have to put your ballot in a secrecy envelope, and that goes into a declaration envelope. So two envelopes that have to be physically opened by a real person, and then those ballots have to be smoothed out and fed into a machine. So it is kind of a lengthy process that once it's fed into that machine, it can go very quickly. They have very sophisticated machines to count the vote. It can count 10,000 ballots an hour, but it has to be physically fed into that machine. And we were actually at the Pennsylvania Convention Center here in Philadelphia, where the votes for Philadelphia are currently being processed right now, and it is a laborious operation, according to the voting officials that we heard from there. They likened it to an assembly line. There are 150 workers voting around the clock. They're counting the votes around the clock. They're going to be counting throughout the night to try and tally those votes as soon as they can, because, of course, everyone wants to know what the election result is going to be like here in Pennsylvania. But authorities are saying, calm down, be patient. The governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, the mayor of Philadelphia, they have both been tweeting, telling people, be patient, be calm, be united while we get these votes counted. And we were in downtown Philadelphia just a little while ago. A lot of the shops are boarded up there because there was unrest in the city last week following the fatal police shooting of a black man. A lot of those shops kept their windows boarded them up this afternoon in case there is violence in the city. There has a very serious police presence, it must be said, all over the city here. Lots of streets are blocked off. Everyone is saying, be calm, be patient while we count those votes.
It's true, though, Florence, we're seeing similar scenes in cities across the United States. And I guess if there's challenges to those results, tensions will rise even further. But you've been in Pennsylvania for a while now, meeting a lot of different voters. It appears that it does divide to an urban and rural electorate. Tell us a bit more about who is voting what in Pennsylvania to try and give us an idea of how it's sitting.
It really does, Eve. There really is this stark difference between big cities like Philadelphia, where we are, like Pittsburgh, which really lean towards the Democratic Party. We've been in Philadelphia for a couple of days now, and I must admit, we've been talking to a lot of people. We haven't met one single person who said they wanted to vote for Donald Trump. Now, maybe they did. They didn't tell us in any event. It was a very different story when we were traveling around other parts of the state. We went into former mining towns like Scranton, where Joe Biden actually is from, former mining town. There was a different picture there. There were in Scranton, there were pro-Biden lawn signs, pro-Trump lawn signs. And then we went to a Trump rally. This was on Saturday night in Montoursville. That's right smack dab in the center of the state. And there, it's Trump land. A lot of people, at the Trump rally, as you can imagine, people are supporting Donald Trump. They said they've been very satisfied by his presidency. They're looking forward to 4 more years of his presidency if he gets back into the White House. What they're excited about is his economic program. They say he's doing great things for the state. That he promised to boost the economy, to revitalize the coal industry. He's all about fracking. Fracking is a big deal for Pennsylvania's state economy. 500,000 people's livelihood depends on fracking. But, it's a different story here in the city. The people we talk to here, they're concerned about how the president has dealt with the coronavirus pandemic and also the divisions that they feel in American society. So it's really the story of 2 Pennsylvanias that we're seeing here, and it's a numbers game. Some people we were talking to at polling stations said it really is a numbers game here in Pennsylvania, and what it comes down to is who will get the most votes. Every single vote counts. We saw a little plane flying over the city today with, one of those advertisement planes, and it said, vote as if your life depends on it. And certainly that's the feeling that we've gotten from voters here in Pennsylvania across the state, city, and country.
Sounds like a divided state in what appears to be a pretty divided country. Florence Villeminot in Pennsylvania. Thanks indeed for that. We will, of course, be crossing back to Florence when we get those results, which could be, as she was explaining there, quite a while away. Well, we are expecting incumbent President Donald Trump to speak at the White House. You can see there they've already opened the feed where he is expected to address the nation, giving us his reaction so far, at least, to those results as they come in. Donald Trump has been announced the winner in a number of states, including Florida and Texas. Florida, which many had seen as being a very tight race, but he has taken the electoral ballots there, and in Texas 38, Florida 29, but still a lot to play for. Joe Biden, of course, reminding people to stay patient, and as we've been looking at throughout, notably this last half hour, the postal votes could play a very big role in this election. Well, while we wait for Donald Trump to speak, voters have also been choosing new members of Congress as they filled those ballots. Democrats have control of the House and will be hoping to keep that, and also to maybe take control of the Senate. 435 seats in the House of Representatives up for election. 33 Senate seats were up for grabs. Cole Stangler has been keeping an eye on that race as well as everything else. Cole, Democrats thought they would actually make quite a big impact here. It isn't looking very blue at the moment.
That's right. As we heard from Solange earlier, this is not the blue wave that some Democrats were anticipating. So right now, Republicans have a 6-seat majority in the Senate. Democrats, in order to control a majority, need to either win 3 seats if Joe Biden is president, because the vice president serves as a tie-breaking vote in that case, or 4 seats if Donald Trump is the president. And that seemed like a really plausible scenario. It's still, I should really stress, it still is, though that path is looking increasingly complicated for Democrats. You saw Democrats pick up a seat in Colorado that was expected to go their way, where you had John Hickenlooper, former governor, defeating Cory Gardner, the senator in Colorado. So that was a win for the Democrats. On the other hand, Republicans picking up a seat in Alabama that was heavily favored to go the Republicans' way. So that's not too unexpected. But there were a handful of seats that we thought we might see Democratic leads in that simply aren't panning out at the moment right now. North Carolina is a big one of those states where you had Cal Cunningham running against Thom Tillis. Thom Tillis, a very divisive figure as well in the state of North Carolina, a state legislative leader before becoming senator, and also very importantly, the state of Maine, where you had Susan Collins, a senator, a moderate Republican senator who very famously voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, despite a lot of pushback from activists across in the Democratic world, and in particular in her state. Again, the votes are still being counted, but the margin right now, Susan Collins does look to be in the lead right now in Maine. Democrats have a path to potentially winning, to potentially getting that majority, but it's looking complicated. Arizona may end up going their way. Mark Kelly. McSally is the Republican there. Mark Kelly, former astronaut and U.S. Navy captain, potentially winning a seat in Arizona. So you have Arizona, potentially, if they can eke out some wins in Georgia, including the Georgia special election, which would then go to a special election in January. And there's also Montana, but again, it's looking pretty complicated for Democrats right now.
And give us an idea, of the impact on U.S. policy this could have, no matter who wins the presidency.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. The Senate. So in both cases, if you have a Republican Senate right now, as you do right now, we're seeing how that translates the dynamic of a Republican Senate, Democratic House of Representatives, Republican president. What does that mean in terms of, for instance, stimulus policy, where we're seeing these negotiations go on in Capitol Hill? The negotiations tend to tilt a certain way because of who controls the Senate. On the flip side, if you're a Democrat, Joe Biden, if you look at Joe Biden's platform, a lot of those promises that he's hoping to get across really depend on having a Democratic Senate. When you look at things like his climate plan, $2 trillion of spending, a jobs program to help fight climate change, that seems very difficult to pass if you have a Republican Senate. You look at things like labor reform to try to make it easier to organize unions in the United States. You look at just basic economic policy, for instance, hiking the corporate tax rate, hiking taxes on the most wealthy. That gets very, very tricky if you have a Republican Senate, if not impossible. So a lot of stakes here in the Senate race, in these Senate races. Again, we still have a lot to play out here. A handful of states are going to be continuing to count their votes. But again, can't really emphasize it enough. The blue wave has not happened. It hasn't happened at this stage. And things are looking not so great for Democrats at the moment.
Okay, cool for now. Thanks indeed. But as you say, there's still a lot of counting being done. If we look back at that presidential picture, it's still neck and neck with 82% of the votes counted. We have Biden on 49.8% and Trump on 48.5%. So really all still up for grabs. Well, let's speak now to the Director of Governmental Studies at the Bipartisan Policy Centre, author of Absentee and Early Voting, a book about that, Mr. John Fortier. Mr. Fortier, your book very much a theme of this year's election. We're seeing unprecedented early voting, and it looks like to a large extent it will all come down to those votes.
Yes, we've seen in America a trend towards lots more voting by mail that's been happening over the last 30 years, but all of a sudden this election, because of coronavirus, we've seen a big jump up. Maybe almost 45% of our votes will be cast that way, and our turnout is likely to be record overall. Also the case that those votes are being cast much more by Democrats. That was not true in the past. We've become polarized even about the way we want to vote. So as we sit here, not knowing what's going to happen, being a closer race than some thought it was, that the counting really does matter. We're probably not going to get answers out of some of the key Midwestern states like Pennsylvania and Michigan. We may have a very close race in Georgia. And so we're going to wait. It probably will be in the next day or two that enough of the vote comes in to really be able to say who the winner is, unless we're very, very close. We're going to recount. But really, the mail ballots have made a significant change in the way we think about this election.
Indeed, and having to be patient there for those results. But we have heard from incumbent President Donald Trump repeatedly. He's questioning the validity of mail-in votes, saying that they are open to fraud. Is there any reason to believe such?
Well, I don't think there's wide-scale fraud with respect to any part of the voting system, even mail voting. But there are some controversies, some back and forth between the parties, some lawsuits that have gone on as to whether we extend the time for ballots or not. Most of them have been resolved, but there are some that are out there. And to the extent we end up in close races, we're going to be questioning some of these results. Will these particular ballots count because they've missed the deadline? Will these other ballots count because they aren't quite filled out right? And if we really are in a recount situation with all of these mail ballots, there's going to be plenty to argue about.
Could you see Donald Trump taking legal action against this vote? I mean, could we potentially see this dragging on for quite some time, for weeks?
Well, again, I think we'll see in the next day or two the bulk of the counting get done, even in these states that are taking longer.
Mr. Fortier, I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off there because we are going to cross live to the White House now, where Donald Trump is about to address the nation.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you. This is without question the latest news conference I've ever had.
We love you. We love you.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much, and I want to thank the American people for their tremendous support. Millions and millions of people voted for us tonight, and a very sad group of people is trying to disenfranchise that group of people, and we won't stand for it. We will not stand for it. I want to thank the First Lady, my entire family, and Vice President Pence, Mrs. Pence, for being with us all through this. And we were getting ready for a big celebration. We were winning everything, and all of a sudden it was just called off. The results tonight have been phenomenal, and we are getting ready. I mean, literally, we were just all set to get outside and just celebrate something that was so beautiful, so good, such a vote, such a success. The citizens of this country have come out in record numbers. This is a record. There's never been anything like it. To support our incredible movement, we won states that we weren't expected to win. Florida, we didn't win it. We won it by a lot. And we won the great state of Ohio. We won Texas. We won Texas. We won Texas by 700,000 votes, and they don't even include it in the tabulations. It's also clear that we have won Georgia. We're up by 2.5% or 117,000 votes with only 7% left. They're never going to catch us. They can't catch us. Likewise, we've clearly won North Carolina, where we're up 1.4% or 77,000 votes with only approximately 5% left. They can't catch us. We also, if you look and you see, Arizona, we have a lot of life in that. And somebody declared that it was a victory for, and maybe it will be. I mean, that's possible. But certainly there were a lot of votes out there that we could get, because we're now just coming into what they call Trump territory. I don't know what you call it, but these were friendly Trump voters. and that could be overturned. The gentleman that called it, I watched tonight, he said, well, we think it's fairly unlikely that he could catch. Well, fairly unlikely. And we don't even need it. We don't need that. That was just a state that if we would have gotten it, it would have been nice, Arizona. But there's a possibility, maybe even a good possibility. In fact, since I saw that originally, it's been changed and the numbers have substantially come down just in a small amount of votes. So we want that obviously to stay in play. But most importantly, we're winning Pennsylvania by a tremendous amount of votes. We're up 600. Think of this. Think of this. Think of this. We're up 690,000 votes in Pennsylvania. 690,000. These aren't even close. It's not like, oh, it's close. With 64% of the vote in, it's going to be almost impossible to catch. And we're coming into good Pennsylvania areas where they happen to like your president. I mean, it's like very good. So we'll probably expand that. We're winning Michigan, but I'll tell you, I looked at the numbers. I said, whoa. I said, wow, that's a lot. By almost 300,000 votes, and 65% of the vote is in. And we're winning Wisconsin, so we're winning. We don't need all of them. We need, because when you add Texas in, which wasn't added, I spoke with the really wonderful governor of Texas just a little while ago, and Greg Abbott, he said, congratulations. He called me to congratulate me on winning Texas. I mean, we won Texas. I don't think they finished quite the tabulation, but there's no way. And it was almost complete, but he congratulated me. Then he said, by the way, what's going on? I've never seen anything like this. Can I tell you what? Nobody has. So we won by 107,000 votes with 81% of the vote. That's Michigan. So when you take those three states in particular, and you take all of the others, I mean, we have